Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Here's Perry to Gar-Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it!
Suns, Booker for the win. Yes!
Another Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam.
And for the first time in his playoff career, LeBron James will lose a first-round playoff series. Look, goes, boom, one final time.
Out to Booker, 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Booker on the drive, goes up. Here's the shot. Shoot! He got it! Woo! He got it! And the Suns win the game. Devin Booker at the buzzer puts it up and puts it in. Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less, a podcast about the team that just defeated LeBron James and the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers in the first round of the NBA playoffs. My name is Max McCauley, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host. His name is David Nash. David, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Max. I've just got 3 words for you. Suns in 6.
Suns in 6, baby. It's become trite and cliche at this point, but it's surreal, man. I can't get over how amazing this feels.
I was going to ask you, man, because, you always start out the pod asking me how I'm doing. And, I was surprisingly calm throughout the series. I don't know whether that's because I talked myself into the fact that, it was going to be a tough one. And if we managed to win, it would be, a huge win for the fan base. But there was nothing like that last game. My mood completely changed knowing that was like a closeout game. My stress level went through the roof. I just felt very, very different watching that game than I did to any of the ones beforehand. So, how are you feeling? How are you feeling in that last game? How are you feeling now, Max?
Before the series started, and I think I actually came across this way on the podcast, I was calm about it. I think I was one of the Suns fans who maybe had the most level-headed take about us drawing the Lakers in the first round. But once we got to Game 5, I was a complete wreck. Game 5, it was tough for me. Until we blew them out, obviously. It got easier.
Yeah.
And then, Game 6, particularly when they started to come back at the end of the, sort of the whole third, into the third, and then early fourth, I was screaming at the TV. I was really scared, David. But then we'll get into it, obviously, later. But I think the moment where that got a little easier for me was when Chris Paul kind of took over the game for a little stretch there and got us a little bit of a breathing room.
Yeah, he came up big, and that's going to come up throughout our discussion. So I can't wait to talk about it, to be honest. We only get to do this every now and then now, and I know there's a lot of listeners who are looking forward to us rejoining, and I'm just grateful that we got the opportunity. We said we'd keep doing it as long as the Suns keep themselves alive. So I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to jump into it, and maybe you can give the listeners just a quick update on how this episode's going to go, Max.
Absolutely. So we're going to spend the first half breaking down the Lakers-Suns series, which we just won, David. We're going to start with the 5 stars, and that's probably going to take out most of it because there's just a lot to talk about with how well so many players played in this series. Then we're going to do a couple more small things on the Suns. Did you know, as always, after that? Then we're going to do the Denver series, obviously. We're playing the Denver Nuggets, David. We did not win the championship just now. There's more basketball to be played, and it's going to be a tough series. So we're going to get into that, break down everything we think about it, kind of do the big questions, the same thing we did for the Lakers series, and then, as always, we'll finish off with 7 seconds or less. But before we get into any of that, David, how about a little bit of a recap?
As you said, Max, we didn't just win the championship. Our Phoenix Suns just took care of business in the first round, defeating the 7-seed Lakers 4-2. In Game 1, it was a 99-90 result. Book had 34, 7, and 8 in that one. Game 2, we went down 102-109. DA came up big in that one, 22 and 10. Game 3, very similar result, 95-109. DA again had 22 and 11. Game 4, got it back, 100 to 92 was that win. I wanted to mention DA again, finally, well, I shouldn't say finally because he was big throughout all 4 first games, but mentioning his name as the highlight here in Game 4. He had 14 and 17, and I think maybe the best game I've seen him play for the Phoenix Suns. We'll get into that later. Game 5, 115-85, the blowout that you mentioned before. Book got back on track, 37-5 in that one. And Game 6, the final game of the series, Max, a 113-100 win over the Lakers. Book 47, 11 rebounds and 3 assists, Max. We'll get into the health very quickly. Obviously, the looming one for any Suns fan who hasn't been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks is Chris Paul's injury, the shoulder that happened in that first game. Seems to be an ongoing thing. We're not getting a hell of a lot of information out of the Suns on that one. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later and what we can expect from Chris. Ayton had that little shoulder, which has also been bothering him all season long and seems to be quite similar to the CP3 injury, where it'll just flare up every now and then with contact. LeBron got him in that final game. You could call it a cheap shot. It was a hard box out, if anything else. And that might be something that'll come up going forward. And something I was unaware of until the game even finished, and I saw him on Monty's iPhone in the locker room, Max. Tyshawn Alexander currently is ill and not with the team, but that's obviously not a huge thing for the rotation or even the reserves, because I don't think anyone expected Tyshawn in unless it was as a human victory cigar, and we already have one of those.
Yes, we do,
Max. So, or a couple of those, and maybe he's playing more than he should be right now, but we'll get into that too. So I'll throw you a question, like I always do in these recaps to finish it off. Moment of the series, Max. You can pick a game, you can pick a play, you can pick a moment. I've got a couple in mind, but I'm happy to throw over to you to start us off.
There's a few in this series that stand out, but there's one that I think is above the rest. I don't think it's even particularly close. It's Booker's first quarter at Game 6 when he hit those threes. That stretch, especially the back-to-back threes, I think the fifth and sixth threes, where they were basically the same motion, and they weren't easy shots by any means. That was just, again, David, we should pat ourselves on the back a little bit. It wasn't quite right, but remember at the very end of our podcast last time around, we talked about how, what if Booker broke the record Game 7 win against the Lakers? Well, it wasn't Game 7, but it was Game 6, and it was pretty fun, wasn't it?
It was so much fun, and I can't get over that first quarter from him. I tweeted while it was happening that not a huge shock. There's probably not a young guy, and definitely not a young guy that played for the Phoenix Suns that I was more confident was going to, stand up big in big games for the Phoenix Suns. And that's why I found that, some of the comments directed towards him during the season and even during those 2 losses against the Lakers, I thought were, a little much, because this guy just continually adjusts, watches the film. He commented in the press conference after the game that he's been studying a lot of film and watching everything that he possibly can through this series, and I think we just saw it. I was going to talk about it later, but I can mention it now. We just saw him evolve throughout this series after that first big moment in Game 1, and then they really put the pressure on him, and he kind of evolved into taking the shots that he knew that he had to, and he just came out so strong. And you're right, I've got a couple of other moments that I wrote down, but that's definitely, from a Suns perspective, the moment of the series. And the competing emotional interests during that first quarter, Max, because whenever Booker would have 5-6 threes in a game, that's all anyone would talk about on Twitter. Could he get to that magic number 7? And he did it. He did it in the second quarter, I believe,
that's right.
and in fact got to 8 out of 10 for the game, Max.
Yeah, and the 8th one was a big one. Do you remember which one that was? When it was at the end of the third quarter, pull-up 3? When things were kind of going awry a little bit?
It was huge. I think it was the only one of his in the second half. As we said, he hit 7 in the second quarter. And then, they just managed down the stretch there to just eke out enough big buckets to hold the Lakers off. But for my moments, I tweeted about this yesterday. There's kind of 2, really. One's the LeBron post-up. I've got to say, I have absolutely nothing wrong with what LeBron did. I think it was just the moment. I know our good friend Scott Howard tweeted about it at the time or after the loss as well.
I will tell you right now, he did have a problem with it, David.
It just hurt. We were getting
Yeah.
clowned, and it would look like the series was falling away from us. And, as I tweeted, we were 353 to 297 since that moment. LeBron actually missed the shot, which is the funniest thing about the moment, because no one will remember that. And, probably no one but Suns fans will remember the post-up at all in a few years' time. But that, and then his dunk off the backboard in Game 4.
Yeah.
And the reason I mention that is because within 5 seconds, the Suns inbounded the ball, took it down to Mikal in transition, and he nailed a 3.
Yep.
And that was, to me, the moment that I went, those two moments together, because I think they really, even though they lost Game 3, it really kind of snapped them back in after that moment, because they felt it too, that they were getting clowned, and they were just head down from that moment onwards. And that other moment that I mentioned was probably the encapsulation of that. They didn't call a timeout. They didn't get flustered by the LA crowd going berserk. They just did their business, Max.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I had to talk about that with some friends, how important that Mikal 3 was at that particular moment.
Yeah.
Because, we had made a nice little run there, and I think people forget. Everyone seems to think that revisionist history. I even heard Zach Lowe talk about it today, which, by the way, I love Zach Lowe generally. He's been awful on this series. Terrible. Absolutely terrible.
And he's not alone. Not alone on that.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. They have bad incentives, to be fair. But even he was like, they were getting killed until Anthony Davis got hurt. That is not the case whatsoever. It's not the case. He played that entire second quarter, and he didn't get hurt until we were already up by, I think, 4 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they were up when that happened, and Caruso throws out the backboard, like you said, LeBron gets that's such a momentum play, and just to come down there and hit that 3 and keep the lead and just keep them at bay, it was such a huge moment for them. And I will go to my grave thinking, especially because Davis wasn't even that good in that game, they would have won that game with Davis playing, in my opinion.
Oh, he was terrible leading up to that. You could argue that it was the other injury that maybe meant he was terrible, not the one that he eventually had. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is the great thing about narratives and history books, Max. At the end of the day, we'll look back on this and the Phoenix Suns will have won the first series, the round 1 series against the Lakers, and that's really all that matters at the end of the day. And throw that same feeling over to the moment we were just talking about. It's exactly the same. 3 points is more than 2, so you can get lost in the emotional aspect of it and what other people are saying, but at the end of the day, the black and white of it is, in that play specifically, the Suns came out on top, and on the series overall, the Suns came on top. And I can't wait to talk more in depth about it now with you, Max, because there's just so much of that little stuff to highlight from this series, and that's why we love doing this.
100%. And we'll get to 5 stars in 1 second, but again, this is we're going to derail a lot this one, David. You bringing out the LeBron dunk off the backboard, and also remember that just a few minutes before that, he had that insane spin transition dunk.
Yes.
I think on Cam Johnson, and at that moment I was like, oh God, is LeBron James back? And the answer was no, David, he wasn't. So isn't that weird how in that that second quarter, he looked like he was like LeBron James again, and then it was just gone. What do you count for that? What was the reasoning for that?
Yeah, it was really hard to track. I was very similar. It's like you were just waiting for him to turn on the afterburners, and there were those little moments in games where you were like, oh, okay, here it is. Yep. He's back healthy. He's had another day's rest. He's got a bit of momentum. And, I'm no doctor. I'm not in the locker room. Don't really know what to attribute it to. I think he had the physical strength to do that in spurts, but he just couldn't do it over 35, 40 minutes a game. And we just saw that he was trying to conserve his energy, and the Suns were just too good. They weren't able, he wasn't able to manipulate the game like he normally would and save those little pockets of energy to really take over the game. And I can't remember what game it was, to be honest, so I'm not even going to try, but there was one where they came out hot. He hit a few shots, and then he just kept taking big threes, and it was like, that was the moment that I was like, okay, I think I know what LeBron we're dealing with this series, and it's the one where he's going to try and throw the knockout punches, but not how we're used to seeing him do it. And that was really the key to me, was he knew that he kind of had to do it another way, and he was trying to take those little moments to really beat down on the Suns. And going full circle, that's where the pride in this team and the way they were able to keep grinding through it. And because there were those moments, particularly in LA, where it looked like they were taking over, but the Suns just kept punching back.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing people need to realize about them looking so good against us in game 2 and 3, Yeah, Chris Paul couldn't play very well in those games, guys. Like, you also have to remember that we have a Hall of Fame point guard who was also hurt. It's not just Anthony Davis. It's unbelievable how much this gets thrown under the rug.
Yep. And
But anyway, I don't want to complain about that. Let's get to the good stuff, David.
let's do it.
All right, so like we said, we're going to do the 5-star thing. Any longtime listeners know what we do is we rank the players from 5 stars, best player on the Suns for that particular stretch of time. Obviously, we're doing the series here, down to 1 star, which would be the 5th best player in that particular stretch of time. I think in this one we might have some honorable mentions. In fact, I know we do because I know my notes are in front of me and I have some honorable mentions for you. But let's start with the 5-star, David. I will run down his stats. I don't think there's any doubt who it is. The 5-star player, David, is Devin Booker. I don't think any Suns fan would disagree with that. His series stats, 29.7 points, 5 assists, 6.2 rebounds, 49% from the field, 43% from 3, take that Chris Hansen, 94% from the free throw line with 8 free throw attempts a game, 63% true shooting. I also want to run down his game 6 stats, David. You ran down them a little bit already,
yep.
So I'll go quickly here. 47, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, 15 of 22 shooting, 8 of 10 from 3, 9 of 9 from the line. Good for a 91% true shooting, David. He had 3 turnovers. David, but he played 46 minutes. 46 minutes. I'll take 3 turnovers with 46 minutes. What do you think?
And 40.8 minutes per game for the series, Max, which the first thing I wanted to note off the top, other than talking about those stats being phenomenal, and I'll get back to that in a second, is I was in particular, very wrong about how many minutes Devin Booker would play in this series, and a guy that we might talk about much later will be Monty Williams, and I think we got a window in there to Monty as a playoff basketball coach. He is going to lean on his best player as much as he needs to lean on his best player, and that included playing him all but 2 minutes in that closeout game, which Book even said after the game they treated as if it was a Game 7, so they knew how important it was to close the Lakers off when they had the opportunity to. But the stats are phenomenal, Max. I really had to take a moment to sit back last night after the game and just look over those stats that you mentioned. You know, the shooting percentages against the number 1 defense in the league. You want to argue, whether they were at that level or not in this series. I don't really care. This was his first ever playoff series, and those stats are superstar stats, no matter how experienced you are, let alone your first ever campaign. So what were you the most impressed with will be the question that I'll throw with you, because there was a lot of it that we just come to expect and somewhat take for granted with Book, Max, but what were you the most impressed with in his first playoff series?
Real quick, I want to point out, because you mentioned the defense thing, the Lakers had the best defense in the NBA while LeBron and AD were both out.
Yes.
During that time only. So this team plays defense regardless. They're a great defensive team. I think you'll see that when we play Denver, that things look a little more open.
Yes.
But no, my favorite thing about the performance, it's not even the stats. You alluded to it. It's what he came in looking like. That dude had no interest whatsoever in playing a Game 7. He was not playing a Game 7. Yeah. I love the way, I don't know if you listened to, Bill Simmons had Sarat Sohi, I think his name is, on his podcast. And she said, I love the way she put this. Like, he had 47 points. He had no thought in his mind of going for 50. He didn't care. He was there to win a game. That's all he cared about. That was all business for him.
Yeah.
And the other side I'll throw out, because I think he had a very similar approach in Game 5. When he showed up in the first quarter and dominated. I posted this on Twitter. You saw it. Combining the first quarters of games 5 and 7, 40 points on 15 of 19 shooting. That is just slightly, Dave. I did the math. I did the true shooting calculation myself. Just slightly over 100% true shooting right there. Just slightly. So, yeah, that dude came out to set the tone. And he did, and that's what I'm most impressed by, David.
Yeah, and we touched on it before. It was just absolutely fascinating watching him feel out an opponent over 6 games because they threw everything at him. He was their number 1 defensive assignment, and particularly when CP3 went down, it became even harder for him. I'll throw some more stats out for you and the listeners. His win stats in the 4 games, Max: 32 points per game, 8 rebounds, 5.3 assists on 54, 50, 92. My answer to the question that I posed to you was just his poise, and Monty talked about it pretty much all series. I listened to Monty's press conferences responses pre and post game pretty much as I possibly could, and poise was the number one word that just kept coming across. And I just think he was poised the whole time. He knew when to put the foot down, when to manipulate the defense and trust his teammates. Here's another interesting stat that I'll throw out to you, Max.
Sure.
Free throws. In the wins, he had 6 free throws a game. In the losses, he had 12.
Wow.
And I really like that because Monty made a comment after the series was done that they really, in the last few games, sat together, looked over everything, and Monty was stressing to him and his teammates that if Book passes up the first shot, it very rarely was getting back to him for a good shot afterwards, and they really wanted Book to take the first available shot. And I think that stat bears that out a little bit, because whilst he was getting to the line in the losses, it was really bogging down the the offense, and the Lakers defense was doing the bogging down, and they just weren't in the rhythm, and that didn't help the rest of the team. Whereas I think when he was more aggressive and actually looked for his own shot more, I think it opened everything up for the team past that, Max.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think it's a great point. And I love your poise point too, because let's be honest, like, Devin Booker, not a guy known for his poise, really, in the regular season, right?
Nope.
He's a guy who loses it sometimes and really starts to play poorly when he gets emotional, and that didn't happen in this series at all, David. Not a single time do I think Devin Booker got out of control because of his emotions. Not once, and that is a huge improvement over where he's been, and it goes to show you how seriously he took this, how much, not only how seriously he took it, but his capacity for taking it that seriously, because not everybody in the world can do that. Some people, we talked a lot before the series started about playoff experience, how important playoff experience is, right? And I think for the 90% of players, it is that important because you have to build that level of mental toughness. I think what Devin Booker showed us in Game 6 and Game 5 to a lesser extent, but especially Game 6, was that he was born with that level of mental toughness. He didn't have to learn it.
Yep. And I think, we'll get to it later, but you mentioned it before as well. The drop-off to the Nuggets in this next series is just going to feel crazy easy for Book after what he was thrown from the Lakers. But to that point that you just raised, and we're going to get to it with, I assume, the next player that we're going to talk about, Max, and CP3 shouted him out in his post-game press conference as well. I think we finally got the answer to whether the Suns really struggled with the last 10 games of the regular season and some of the stuff we were seeing. The questions online between Suns fans is like, is this stuff to worry about, or are they just really waiting for the playoffs to start? We got the answer, guys. This team was ready for the playoffs probably 10 to 15 games before the season ended, and Book locked in. Even his free throw shooting, Max, went down this season compared to last season, and everyone was kind of like, along with the 3-point shooting at the same time, is it a concern? Back to 94% for the series, which is what we're more used to. He was just locked in every minute of this game that he played, even with that exhaustion that he must have been feeling playing over 40 minutes for the series. So yeah, I could do the whole pod on Devin Booker, Max. I'm not sure if you've got anything else to add, but I've said enough about how much I loved his series.
I absolutely do. There is one other thing that we have to touch on, because it's gotten too underrated in this series because of how it went out and how good he was in offense and just everything. There's a lot to this series. But Devin Booker played the best defensive basketball of his life in this series, including in Game 6. I thought he was so solid all the time. I saw our friend Evan Sidery had a stat where Booker had the best defensive field goal percentage of anyone in the playoffs so far, only 34.7% shots made against them. Listen, some of that is because the Lakers can't shoot, to be fair. But I thought he was rarely out of position. I thought he did a great job contesting. There was a couple shots in the third quarter of Game 6 when the Lakers were starting to make a run where I think LeBron took it in on him and he stayed straight up and missed the layup on Booker.
Yep.
Booker was guarding LeBron at the rim a couple times. And listen, Booker, again, he's never going to be the best defensive player in the world, but if he's what he was in this series, which I think was above average, David, I honestly do, he could be a really, 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 really good basketball player.
Yeah, and I know I keep commenting on these post-game presses, but, as someone who's so interested in the team, it is something that I looked to a lot after the games to try and get a window into this team, and CP3 shouted him out. He called him a legit two-way player, and that he's played with other guys in the past who were really only cared for offense. Cough, cough. James Harden shot, I think, there. But he made a point to say that Book cares about both sides of the ball and that it's such a big thing when your superstar player on the team and everyone that looks to that guy really cares and shows pride in that. And yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because it would have been really silly to just go over Booker and not talk about the defense, because just positioning wise, rotation wise, as you said, he's never going to be amazing. He loses out on a first step occasionally when he's guarding, really quick guards, and that's fine. But I just thought he got to spots earlier than his opponent a lot in this series, and whether it was Dennis Schroeder or when, as you said, he got switched onto bigs like LeBron and even Markieff Morris tried to take him a couple of times and failed. And I just think that's what we saw, what we talked about so much longer ago in terms of whether it would improve when the Suns really needed it to improve. And again, another tick. It certainly did, Max.
So much vindication, David. So much vindication for everything.
Love it.
That's so great. Okay, let's go on to the next guy. Actually, preview. We're gonna get back to Devin Booker's game in Game 6 in a little while here.
Yeah.
But DeAndre Ayton is the 4-star player, David. I think every Suns fan would have said he was the 5-star player through Game 4. I think it's fair to say.
Yes.
I'll let you take the floor with him because I led into Booker. So you can go ahead and give us the DeAndre Ayton breakdown.
15.8 points per game, 10.7 rebounds. He shot just shy of 80% at 79.6% for the entire series, guys. He averaged 3 offensive rebounds and was big in a few games on that. And he was a team second high, I believe, plus 5.7 net rating for the entire series. He was big. He was very, very important. Some of his, I guess, bigger games ended up coming in Suns losses, but I'm not going to use that against him in any way, shape, or form because I think he was ultra consistent throughout the entire series. I couldn't be impressed enough, to be honest. And as you said, other than Book just going absolutely berserk in those last couple of games, he was clearly the Suns' most important and best player up until Game 5. I don't know where else to start. I'll throw a question back towards you, Max. Biggest surprise, because I think, we definitely, owe Ayton some time here based on the last episode that we had. But I'm also a bit torn. I think he was obviously huge, but I do think he did pretty much what we outlined he needed to and brushed over in the last episode. But I do want to kind of give him his props for how he did it. So, in terms of things that he did that maybe we weren't expecting, what was the biggest surprise for you, Max?
Well, I'll say I wasn't expecting him to have the highest field goal percentage in the shot clock era in a playoff series. At minimum 50 attempts, he had the highest ever. 43 out of his 54 shots he made.
Jesus.
And listen, I heard a lot of people, especially mostly Lakers fans, who really were just awful the whole time, as usual.
Yep.
Lakers fans being themselves. They were saying, oh, he's only playing well because of the way the Lakers are game planning. They're letting him do whatever he wants to do. Yeah. Okay, fair enough, but also, you don't have to make every shot. Right, like you can miss some shots sometimes too if they're doing that for you.
Yeah, just quickly.
80%. Yeah, go ahead.
That's basketball. You take what the defense gives you. Like that's exactly the game we're playing here, guys. Like, come on.
Yeah, and 80% of his shots made. That's not the game plan. I promise you, that's not the game plan. Ayton took their game plan and exploited it. Is what happened.
Exactly.
So yeah, that was probably the biggest surprise because, listen, I agree with you. I think people are gonna, if they listen to our podcast that we had about the Lakers series, they'll laugh at us because we actually sort of we downplayed his importance to the series.
Yeah.
And I think that was wrong. I'm not gonna say we weren't wrong about that, but I do think he just did a better version of what we wanted him to do, which was just be extremely solid the whole time. Right? He never scored 30 points in a game or anything like that. It was never that flashy. I mean, I think the closest thing was Game 4, which I agree with you said earlier was his best game. It was his best game. I think his massive third quarter of Game 4, when Davis didn't come out of the locker room, and everyone's like, oh, well, Davis is out now, so that it's over. But listen, you have to take advantage of that. Some teams, when they have an advantage that pops up like that, they don't take advantage of it.
Yep.
But the Suns immediately jumped on their throats. They're like, oh, you don't have Davis? Well, watch what Ayton's about to do to Drummond. Because Ayton pants Drummond on national TV for the next 5 minutes in that thing. And I think that maybe that's my answer, David. Maybe I stumbled into it. What I was surprised by was the way Ayton was able to take a situation like that and just own it.
100%. And I think you touched on it all there. The Lakers clearly had a game plan where they wanted to challenge him, probably games 1 through 3 specifically. And even though we lost a couple of those games, I think we then saw in games 4 through 6 that their defense actually changed a little bit and things opened up for the Suns shooters, and that's how we got hot from the outside. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's just so simple with DA. This is how he's played pretty much since he put on a Suns uniform. Like, the Suns play, a very simple style of basketball where whether it's pick and roll or those dribble handoffs at the top of the key or the elbow actions that they run, it's all about getting Ayton going north-south down the lane and drawing bodies into the lane. Now, the Lakers, as you said, they didn't expect him to shoot 80%. They came with a game plan where they thought they could exploit him, and they were happy for smaller guys to switch onto him because they thought we were going to get, I guess, the DeAndre Ayton that we've got and come to know through many parts of the regular season, where he might punish you one time out of 3 or 4, but the fact that he doesn't those other 3 or 4 times means that it's a solid defensive game plan. And that was the surprise. He punished them every single time. And, you could say, oh, he missed a few shots. Yeah, you're going to miss a few shots, and that's fine, but it's the nature of the way that he played. Like, even when he was missing, he wasn't giving the defense what they wanted. Like, he was missing trying to go over guys. He wasn't taking fall away jump shots. I think he took 1 mid-range shot for the entire series, which is just incredible and what we've pretty much come to know from him, particularly with the second half of the season. So, just think about the way they played games 1 to 3. Yes, the Lakers won a couple of those games, and then how they played games 4 to 6. You can pretty much put down the Suns getting back on track shooting-wise from outside and some of the lanes opening up exactly to the way that DeAndre Ayton played in games 1 and 3, because the Lakers had to go away from it a little bit. They even went away from it in their lineups because of the way that DeAndre Ayton was playing. So I can't speak highly enough of that. I was just, I've got to say, I was shocked at the level of commitment and focus and engagement he had within every single minute of every single game. And that was the biggest surprise to me. I knew we could count on him to, do those things we spoke about in the last episode, but I do think we undersold it, and I undersold it because I thought he could do it to, I guess, the level that we'd come to appreciate from him, which was maybe 3/4 of the time, and then I was worried that playoff basketball, he couldn't do it for the full, 48 minutes, and he did. And I'm very thankful that he did, Max.
And to be fair to us, it's hard to predict that somebody was going to have his best games of his entire life, like 6 games in a row in the playoffs. It's a little hard to predict.
Yep.
And also the Lakers, as you pointed out, didn't predict it because they built their game plan around it not happening.
Exactly.
So that was something. We haven't touched on quite my favorite thing yet about the whole series, David, for Ayton.
Do it.
So game 1, the only game I went to, game 1. I don't know if you remember this, David, but late in the second quarter of game 1, he picked up his 3rd foul on a very questionable call.
Yep.
He had to go out of the game, came back, did not commit a foul for the rest of the game while shutting down Anthony Davis. Mm-hmm. He then, for the rest of the series, as far as I can recall, was never again once in foul trouble at all. It was not a problem.
No, it wasn't.
Right?
It wasn't, and that huge credit goes to DA and the Suns, and I think there's a lot of things that the Lakers will look back on in this series and regret that they didn't do, but they just didn't, try or look to punish him, and that's not to downplay the defense that DeAndre played, but
well, I gotta disagree with you a little bit there, David. I think they tried a little bit. I don't think it worked. The thing about it, you can score on DA, you can do a lot of things to DA, but in fact, you can trick him into fouling you on the perimeter. He had a bad foul on LeBron on a 3 or somebody on a 3 in one of those games. I think maybe game 5. But it's really hard to get Ayton to foul you on the interior. Here's the thing about DA. He's so long and athletic and tall that he doesn't really have to do a whole lot to deter your shot, and he doesn't try to. He didn't block. He only averaged 0.7 blocks for the series, David. And I think in this particular series, it worked out to his benefit because he wasn't trying to block shots, which, sometimes it results in fouls. He was just playing solid defense, standing his ground, being tall, and having long arms. And to some extent, that kind of benefited him here, don't you think?
Yeah, he plays really sound defense. I really love that about him, and it's why we're never going to see him have a, 3.5 block average per season or per game in any particular season of his career, I don't think, because he just doesn't, he's not a block hunter. Like he's happy to just play that solid defense and then get the defensive rebound and finish off the possession. It's one of my favorite things about him. I think you're right, and I think just to touch on it very quickly, it'll probably be the only time we mention it, I think we actually got a pretty favourable whistle, particularly in the last few games. You know, something
the last few games, yes.
Yeah, something we were worried about with, you know, the Lakers getting kept in the series by the NBA and the refs by, you know, having a questionable... But we played really great aggressive defense and we didn't get disciplined for it. We didn't get, you know, the bad 50-50 calls and stuff. We saw a lot in that last game of LeBron trying to plead with the refs to blow their whistle and give him a foul. And, you know, to their credit, they didn't. They watched the game and called the fouls when they were actually there. And I think the Suns played really sound defense. Yeah, I think, you know, we talked a lot offensively. Ayton was huge defensively, and I think you made the best point there in terms of not getting himself in foul trouble, because we all know what's behind him in the rotation and we're all bloody scared of it. And, you know, that's going to come up when we talk about the Denver series, I'm sure, no doubt. But the last shout out that I just want to give him, and it encapsulates both the offensive side and the defensive side, Max, is it's such a thankless job sometimes, and it's so huge that they got this buy-in. I know I've made this point with you on the pod before. It's just so huge that they got this kind of buy-in from a number one pick.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't happen, Max. I don't think people appreciate that what we're seeing here with DeAndre. You don't have a number one pick come in, buy into the defensive side of the ball when he's so talented offensively with some of the things he can do, you know, his touch, you know, his aggression when he wants to be, you know, there's obviously negatives that stop him from being a monster offensively right now in terms of putting the ball on the floor and things like that. But the fact that they just got him to buy in and play the role that was going to get the Suns to this point of the season and hopefully much further, it's just so big, and I can't talk about it enough because I think we take it for granted with Ayton, and, you know, I think we have to live with the occasional off game in the regular season if this is the kind of guy we're going to get when we're really needing him.
I don't even care what the regular season is if this is the guy we get in the playoffs. No, so there's a few things I want to respond through there, David, because you really, that was great. One thing, and this is just really quick, you're totally right. He didn't put the ball on the floor very much in this series at all, which is good. But remember that layup he had? I think we lost the game 2 or game 3, where he like drove in and did a reverse layup. Oh my God!
Unbelievable.
I was lost my shit.
Yeah, we've seen him do it maybe once or twice before, but not with the added flair of the reverse layup. And I think that was him just saying, you know, fuck this. Like, I'm not going to let you guys, you know, pretend like I can't do anything offensively. And and that was his moment where he was like, whatever you give me, I'm taking it.
Gorgeous. The other thing I want to respond to on him, and then I want to get to the foul thing. So if he wants to make money in his career, he made the right damn decision to play the way he's playing right now, right?
Yep.
Like, this dude's going to make a max contract if he's playing like this. Like, this is what you pay centers for. I think this is like I'm glad, I don't know whether it's his people or his agent or the team, or I don't know who's telling him to play this way, but man, you're going to get a max contract if you play this way, man. I almost feel silly to have Mikal ahead of him after this series, although we'll get to Mikal. I think Mikal had an underrated series. He had a really hard job.
Agreed.
But, I mean, in this particular series, Ayton definitely seemed the more important part of the team. But and the last thing I want to touch on the foul thing before we get to the 3-star. You're totally right, and I think that it goes back to something we talked about in our preview podcast, which was NBA refs are biased towards a team that's more aggressive and better and doing better things on the court.
Yes.
They're not biased towards stars. They are sometimes because they assume they're going to be that way. And I think, you know, that's why I think the calls were worse towards us earlier in the series. But as it went on and as we became the more aggressive and better team, especially in the second half of Game 4 onward, the refs started to give us the bit of the doubt because they thought we were better. They thought we were making the plays. And it makes all the difference. It really does. And I think so much credit to the Suns. Like you said, they put their head down after they got clowned at the end of Game 3. And I think, you know, just the natural human emotions of the refs, they recognized that this Suns team was playing good defense. They weren't screwing around, and they felt it. And, man, it was just, David, I cannot praise their attitude, their fortitude in this series highly enough.
Yep, just poise. I'll say it again because Monty kept saying it. I'm sure they just kept getting reminded of that from the coaching staff, just to keep their head And I think you make a great point. I've never really bought into, NBA refereeing, people looking at which referees are, adjudicating any particular game, although Chris Paul clearly does from his press conference after game 3, I think it was, when they lost, and he kept saying 11-0, 11-0. But I think Booker 8 free throws a game. Those last 2 games the whistle went our way, and that's because we were the better team. And I think the majority of the time, yes, there's been a couple of weird cases in NBA history, but I think the majority of the time the good whistle goes to the good team, and we were the better team in this series, and that's why we got those calls. And I just can't wait to get to the rest of these stars, Max, because I think this is where it's going to start getting interesting between you and I.
Yeah, 5 and 4 were obvious. Every Suns fan in the world had 5 and 4 the way we had them, right?
Yep.
This is where it gets hard, and this is where you had to dive in to really decide, because so I was between 2 different guys for 3-star, David.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I went back and forth. I think that the guy I ended up landing on will be the guy most people have. And I landed on Cam Payne, David.
Do you want to give me the other one? Because I don't have campaigned for 3 stars.
Okay, do you have him for 2 stars?
Maybe.
Okay, all right. So the other one, no, let's keep some suspense in here. I'm gonna go through my campaign stats first.
All right,
you know what?
Yeah.
No,
I do have Cam for 2. So let's do what we always do in these scenarios. Let's go Cam, and then hopefully we match up on the other one.
I'm pretty sure we probably do match up for the other one. But okay, so my 3-star campaign. So average in the series, 12.5 points a game.
Yep.
42.3% 3-point on 4.3 attempts a game. Time to put the shooting questions to rest. Campaign can shoot, guys.
Yes.
3.3 assists to 1.7 turnovers. 1.2 steals a game. 1.0 blocks a game. Perfect from the line.
Yep.
So I really want to go to per 36 real quick with him, because when you go to guys who played off the bench, per 36 is important, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
19.4 points per 36. 6.73 attempts. And remember, he shot 42.3 on those. 5.2 assists to 2.6 turnovers, 1.8 steals to 1.6 blocks. And keep in mind, he had a bad Game 6, David, and a really bad Game 1. His Game 2 through Game 5 were ridiculous. And honestly, his Game 5, I mean, I think Booker and him were the guys, but man, that guy won us in large part Games 4 and 5. I think he was probably the second best player in both those games. And for me, that was enough to give him 3 stars.
Yep, and I don't disagree with you. I think all the points you made I've got written down. Number 1 being the one you said right at the top. At some point, we have to admit that this is who campaign is. We've got the bubble, we've got the regular season. I did the same thing as you. I went to per 36 and looked at the bubble and the regular season, and then what he did in this series, and kind of compared everything. And he was better in this series per 36 than he was compared to those other 2 sample sizes, but not by a hell of a lot. There's just a tremendous amount of consistency there now with Cam over the course of, what is it now, 86 games or something, I guess, if you count the whole regular season, the bubble, and now maybe minus a few games that he missed. So yeah, the shooting is definitely real, and we've seen, whilst he's not the greatest finisher around the rim, once they start closing out him on the shooting, he's got a great ability to kind of go north-south now, and things really open up for the team from there. I think you're right, Game 6, not the best in terms of the way he finished and stuff, but the way that the Lakers were pressing in those final 2 quarters, really throwing absolutely everything with nothing to lose at the Suns. Campaign being able to get past his man was huge, because we didn't have anyone that could do that. Chris Paul was struggling to. Devin Booker, obviously, the way they were playing defense just never allowed him to get past the hip of the first or second defender. That's how they were playing Book. But yeah, Cam's ability to do that really opened up things for other people. So again, another way where stats don't always bear out how a guy's played for everyone else. I think he's very similar to Ayton, and you touched on it before, where his best games were potentially in the Suns' losses, but I don't hold that against him in any way. That's definitely not why I've got him at 2 stars instead of 3. And as you said, I still think he was really big in games 4, 5, and 6, even though the stats weren't quite up to it. And probably the biggest compliment I can give him before I throw a question your way, Max. We saw Monty end with the 3 guards when the series was on the line. They were treating it like a Game 7. They said it. The series was literally on the line. They did not want to go back to Phoenix and finish the Lakers off. And he put Cam Payne, Devin Booker, and Chris Paul out there for pretty much all of the last quarter. So I think they think very highly of him. And I think we nailed that actually from a minutes perspective. He averaged 23.2 minutes per game. And we said in the preview that if anyone's minutes were going to go up, it was likely to be Cam Payne. So you talked about how much you loved him in this series. So I want to throw this question your way. Did you ever want him to start at any point during the series? Because I don't think I saw you mention this, and I don't think you and I talked about it privately, so I was just keen to get your thoughts.
So I had a caveat on that one. But real quick, I do want to point out, you're right about the minutes being higher. That also includes him being ejected in Game 1. So it would have been even higher than that.
Yeah.
So here, before Game 4, here's what I said. I said if Chris Paul is the same level hobbled he was in the last 2 games, then Cam Payne should start. I think that Chris Paul proved that he was better in Game 4 than he was in the other games, so I agree with the decision to start Chris Paul in that circumstance.
Yep.
But I think if he would have been the same as Game 2 and Game 3, yes, I wanted him to start for sure. He deserved to, man. Especially because you're right. I mean, you say he was at his best in our losses. He was our best player in Games 2 and 3, besides maybe Ayton, right?
Yep.
Those were our 2 best players in those games for sure. And at that point, your backs are against the wall. It was 2-1. You can't lose that game. At that point, I was like, I want you to play. And I also wanted to bench Jay Crowder, and that would have been a mistake. But yeah, no, absolutely. And then the last thing I want to touch on with Cam Payne, and I'll throw to you if you have any more on him, but I briefly touched over it. But again, he had 1.8 steals, 1.6 blocks per 36 in this game, in this series. 1.2 and a block a game, just outright, not per 36. He had the most blocks, I think, per 36 on the whole team, and steals. Like, that dude can play defense. Absolutely he can. And if we think that the Red Sea's parting for Devin Booker will be good versus Denver, how about campaigning against backup Denver units?
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
It's going to be really fun. And I think he had 3 blocks in Game 6, so you mentioned it. It's like it wasn't his best game offensively, and it wasn't a 3, you can occasionally see a player pick up 3 really cheap blocks and it means not very much, but his blocks were literally stopping drives to the basket and what would have been layups that he managed to send back and out of bounds, I think maybe on all 3 occasions if I'm remembering correctly. So I'm glad you mentioned Book there with him as well, because I didn't touch on it before with Book. If you're having an off game offensively, and particularly when you're that 6th man spark plug type guy, usually you'll get yanked if you're not hitting shots, but Cam Payne's clearly showing there's other ways that he can impact the game, that even when the shot isn't falling, he's getting others involved with his drives, he's playing defense, and he doesn't become unplayable just because his shot's not falling, Max.
Absolutely, man. You can't really say enough about Cam Payne. I mean, I hope he's our point guard of the future. I'll say that. That's enough praise, probably. All right. How about your 3-star, David? I'm excited to hear this. I hope it's my 2-star. That'll make it a little more synchronistic.
I really do too, because I think it's going to throw me if it's not. My 3 stars went to Jay Crowder, Max.
That is my 2-star, David. How about you top of them?
All right. Here's the case for Jay. I'll go with his stats first. 11.5 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, 2.2 assists. He shot 30% from 3. He was a team high 9.7 plus net rating. The more intangible stuff. His shooting kept AD and the Lakers honest even in those early games when he wasn't doing great from there. His defense was huge, both on Anthony Davis and LeBron James, and I even say that with being absolutely filthy at him when he picked up his cheap foul in one of those games that I think we eventually lost and had to be benched for the rest of the first half. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to go back to a guy we discussed a lot when we had a regular podcast in Kelly Oubre. Jay Crowder was 14.5 plus net rating in wins for the Suns. He was exactly a 0 in losses, so not a negative. So when Jay wasn't hitting shots, couldn't hit the side of a barn, didn't look like he was bringing a hell of a lot offensively, he still wasn't hurting the Suns negatively. It's not like he was unplayable and Monty was, really had to pull him. So I think that's really worth mentioning. The intangible stuff, the spirit that he gives the team, particularly when Chris Paul went down, I think his leadership was just huge for this team. And lastly, a real underrated underrated mover of the ball. I think I said it there, 2.2 assists per game. Outside of the point guards, I think that was the most for anyone on the Suns, and that's probably been my favorite thing about him for the whole season, and I think we saw it in that series, and he finally bounced back shooting. So I don't know, what have you got for it? I'll throw a question at you here, and then you can get going on him. What have you learnt about Jay this season that you didn't know about him? And it can be the season or in this particular playoff series, Max, that surprised you the most. I mentioned mine there with the passing.
I hate to be repetitive of you, but that's what it was, right? I mean, I did not realize how good of a team basketball player he was on both ends of the floor. The guy's just really freaking good at basketball.
Yep.
He just is. He understands the game at a much higher level than I understood. I knew he was a good defender. I knew that he could shoot a little bit, streaky, but could shoot a little bit. I had no idea that he could move the ball around in offense, that he understood an offense the way he does. I didn't know that he was such a good team defender.
Yep.
I thought he was more of like, listen, this guy's big, so he can guard. To me, when we signed him, and I was so happy about the signing, by the way, and I'm way happier about it now, even. But I was like, yeah, you need a guy who is like that tweener 4 guy now. The NBA really aged into him.
Yep.
In a lot of ways. His position is something that kind of got created in the modern NBA. I knew that, but I didn't realize just how many other things he brought, especially from a guy his size and his position. The way he moves the ball in offense isn't impressive for a point guard. But for somebody that does everything he does in defense and his size, and also the emotional cadence he gives the team.
Yep.
I think, outside of maybe, Monty and Chris Paul, he's the most important emotional barometer for how the team's going to play.
Agreed.
And the way he turned this whole thing around, and particularly, I think where the whole series turned around, which was game 4, second quarter.
Mm-hmm.
When we were down 10,
mm-hmm.
and what turned everything around was him making 2 threes in a row, right? Because he was 2 for 22 at that point. He was 2 for 20 going into the game, missed 2 in the first quarter. Everyone was like, Jay, bench Jay. I was front of the crowd, bench Jay. I think I had a tweet that was like, Monty's going to ride Jay Crowder to the offseason, I think is what I said. Something like that. Something that sounds really dumb now. But when he turned that around and started making those, that's when the whole team turned around, because he is an emotional core of this team. And I don't remember what your question was, David. I just started ranting because I love this guy so much. But that's how I feel about Jay Crowder. Yeah. And I do want to point out that an hour ago I had him at 3 stars. I switched campaign at the last second. I can go either way with those two. I really can.
So like usual, we were pretty close on this, which is not a surprise. I'll be interested to see if the listeners disagree with us. But yeah, I just want to reiterate on the shooting point before we move on. 36% in wins and 30% for the series. I can't talk about this enough, and I'll end with a prediction for next series with Jay. Tight defender during the season. He only took 0.7 of those a game, where a defender was, guarding him tightly, and he shot 31% on those. In this playoff series, that almost that did double and a half to 1.8. Jay was getting a lot of those end of the shot clock. Even Book was kind of guilty of this, throwing the ball to Jay Crowder, and he had to heave one up. That then kind of filtered into his open shots from a defender point of view. He, during the season, 2.8 of those and shot 36%. And then in this series, he got 3.3 open threes per game and shot an abysmal 15. And this is Jay. Wide open, 2.8 during the season, and he shot 43% on those. In this series, 2.5 wide open shots from deep per game. Max, he shot 53.3% on those opportunities. Jay is a great open shooter. He is not good at creating for himself or when he has a defender up on him. The reason he was so good for the Suns during the year is when you've got a healthy Chris Paul, and particularly with the way that the Lakers had to adjust to playing against DeAndre Ayton once he punished them on the inside. When Jay gets open looks, he is a very good shooter, and there's just no variance to that. It's kind of there in the stats and the data for his career right now. And I would predict that we're going to see a very, very good series from Jay, because the Nuggets are not the defensive team that the Lakers are, and the ball is going to find him in those wide open looks because of who else they're going to have to guard in this series. And yeah, I'm predicting big series for Jay to jump ahead to the Nuggets, which we'll get to later on.
Oh man, you really preempted me there, David. I really wanted to make a joke about some sarcastic joke about how well he's gonna be screwed next series then if he can't hit open shots. Yeah, that'll be easier for him then. The last thing I want to say on Jay, and then we'll go to 1 star, is he was the guy who got clowned on the most at the end of Game 3. Clowned on by LeBron, straight up. And then he got a bang from Mike Green in Game 4 when he hit that huge corner shot, which, to be honest, maybe not a smart shot with 18 seconds of shot clock in that situation, but we'll overlook that. And then, the fact that he got his revenge at the end of Game 6 and did the little dance and he got to run off the court after the ejection, it was just, man, storybook ending for me, in my opinion.
He's the quintessential guy that if he was on another team, you would absolutely hate him, and I did.
Yeah.
And now he's on my team, and I absolutely love him because that little salsa towards LeBron, and then him sprinting down the tunnel the moment that he realized he'd been ejected. Plus the memes going around in the previous game where he was looking at LeBron from afar and someone caught it from the perfect angle. I just loved everything that Jay brought in this series, and I'll ride with him for sure, Max.
Last thing on Jay, do you remember when he was signed, when we gave him the MLE for 3 years, and every Suns fan was like, wow, what a signing this was. Like, everyone was pumped about the signing. We were all right, guys. Every single one of us.
Yeah, sometimes these things aren't as difficult as people who analyze contracts and free agency and stuff make them out to be. We signed a really good player and we got a really good player. Believe it or not, Max.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some more really good players, David.
Love it.
The 1 star. I literally thought that the next 3 guys I'm about to talk about all had a case for this. I really do.
I agree. Before you go in, I very much agree. Not that you've mentioned the 3 guys, but it can really only be 3 guys because I don't think you're putting Frank Kaminsky in that group, Max.
Starting with Frank Kaminsky. No, I'm not sort of crazy. All right, I'm going to start with my honorable mention, my runner-up, number 3, I guess. So the one I have, the first one out.
Yep.
Mikal Bridges averaged 9, 4, and 1.5 for the series. He was 38.2% from 3. Not too bad.
Pretty good.
On 5.7 attempts. 1.5 steals a game. Very nice. 0.8 blocks. The problem, 38.2% was not only his 3-point percentage, David, it was also his field goal percentage for the series. You know what? He didn't have a good offensive series, and you know what? I'm going to give him a pass for that because he had to guard LeBron James as his primary assignment. He and Jay traded with it, but he was primary on him. Guarding the Lakers' big guys, the big guy LeBron was really his charge.
Yep.
I think no Suns fan's gonna have a problem with the way he did with it. I think he did a great job with it.
Agreed.
That was his job. It just wasn't the series for him, but he was awesome, David.
Yep. I think his switching onto Schroeder as well was big time when they did that, when they went to that. So you couple that with the defense that he played on LeBron, and I think he deserves to be in the conversation as the Suns' 5th best player, even if we're not giving him the actual 1 star. I still think him and DA as a pick and roll combo is like a top 5 pairing in the NBA. There was, can't remember which game it was, but when the Lakers were really cutting us up and they moved Bridges onto Schroeder, and Ayton was often in the pick and roll with Davis, sometimes even LeBron, I think they just guarded it just as well as pretty much anyone can in the NBA. And the only other thing I would say, you've already touched on it, still shot 38% from 3, and probably the key thing there, still on 5.7 attempts a game. The thing that we used to hate about Mikal is when he struggled offensively, then he went into his shell and didn't do anything. But he still put them up. He still put up nearly 6 threes a game. So he kept shooting and he hit just enough to make the defense honest. So what would you rate his, I guess, series out of 10 with all of that in context, Max?
Everything taken into context, I mean, I have really high expectations for Mikal Bridges, Dave. I think in the last podcast I said he'll be our best player in 2 years.
Yeah.
So 5 being what I would have just a baseline average series. I think I still give him a 6 or a 7 just because of what he did defensively.
Yeah, I think I'm at a 7, so we're pretty much on the same page with that. But give me your next honorable mention.
People will be surprised. I alluded to this on Twitter a little bit, so some people might know what's going, that I have this guy above Mikal. I'm going to give you Cam Johnson's stats, David, and they're going to surprise people, I think.
Go for it.
So, because he only played 20 minutes a game, 8 points, modest, 1 steal, fine stats. He shot 41% from 3, David.
Yep.
He shot 44% from the line on the second most attempts on the team. He made 15 out of 16 free throws.
Wow.
He was second in true shooting on the team behind DeAndre Ayton. He averaged a 65% true shooting for the series. His per 36 is where it really stands out. He was our fourth leading scorer per 36. He was second in free throws, as I mentioned already, but by a lot. So Booker was 7.1 per 36. Cam was 4.8. You drop off to Ayton and Payne at 2.6 behind them. He was fourth in rebounds per 36, but if you don't count Craig and Kaminsky, who didn't play very much, he was second in rebounds per 36 behind Ayton. He was tied with Payne, number one in steals. And my favorite stat that I saw when I dug into this, fast break points per 36. He had 4.8.
Wow.
Fast break points per 36. The next closest was Booker with 3.2. He led us in fast break points per 36 by far. I think that we really understated how good he was in his limited role offensively. I think part of that is because it happened in Game 6, and it's hard to react to Game 6 so quickly. He was great in Game 6.
Yeah.
David, so let me just ask you, how do you react to those stats? They surprised the hell out of me when I saw them.
Yeah, I mean, I saw your tweet. I looked very much into Cam, not into some of those extra things that you did. So I guess peeking behind the curtain here, I had Mikal ahead of Cam in my honorable mentions, and then that means we're going to have the same player for the 1 star.
You can all guess who that is.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised about that in the slightest either, because I think we think about these things the same. To be honest, to answer your question, what you've mentioned there makes me want to flip the two, even though, we just talked about the role that Mikal had to play. But I think, on top of what you just mentioned, to summarize, defense continues to be underrated for Cam Johnson, and he hit some big shots, which are in those percentages that you read out, because they needed him to hit a few shots in a few of these games in key moments, and he knocked them down, particularly when they were helping off Book and Cam was left all alone. He knocked down the shots that he was supposed to. So, I mean, the question that I had written down, funnily enough, works perfectly with everything that you just rattled off there. He played 20 minutes per game in this series, Max. How do we get him more?
Well, it's a great question with how they're playing the men. I mean, it's hard to find minutes. This is a deep team, but I will say a team against Denver, I think Cam Johnson actually has a nice opportunity to shine, because I think the one thing that really hurt Cam Johnson in this series, and I think why Suns fans, and again, including me, I didn't really realize this until I saw the stats, kind of thought he was underwhelming. It's because defensively, even though I think he was good defensively overall, especially, again, in per 36, he was tied with Payne for number one in steals on the team.
Yeah.
I think the issue was he couldn't contain guys like LeBron, right? I think he struggled with guys like that. I think when he plays against, he can guard MPJ. MPJ is not going to take him down into the lane. MPJ shoots.
Yeah.
And we'll get into MPJ. I'm terrified of MPJ. I'm not trying to undermine him at all.
Yeah.
But he is somebody that Cam Johnson can guard, right? Because he's not going to punish him. So I think that will be really interesting to see from him. Maybe in a role where he doesn't have to worry so much about his defense.
Yep, I agree. Let's get to the 1 star.
I mean, I think everyone's going to understand this. Chris Paul didn't have a great statistical series, largely because he was hurt the whole series. But he still had a 7.7 assists to 1.5 turnovers ratio in the series. In the final game, he was 12 assists to 1 turnover. David, I believe in whether it was Game 5 or Game 4. I think Game 4 was Game 4 when he was 9 assists, 0 turnovers.
I believe so. Yep.
And the play that I want to point out the most from him, I mean, you can point to a lot of things he did in this series because he rose to the occasion time again. I think my favorite moment for him in the series may have saved the series. Honestly, who knows how this goes if he doesn't make this play? It was towards the end of Game 4. I think it was a minute.
I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
I know you know. I know you know, David, because you and I think about this thing the same way.
Yeah.
He had that deflection on Marc Gasol when Marc Gasol was up at the top of the key and tried to throw a pass, and Chris Paul stole it. And that moment was when I was like, oh, okay, we're going to win this game then. And, man, that moment may have changed the whole series. We won't ever know. You never know what would have happened, but that will stick out in my mind.
And he had 3 steals in that game that all came at pivotal moments and gave the Suns an extra possession and the Lakers down one. So, I'm glad that you brought that up because I didn't have it written down, but that will always be etched in my memory as well because I remember specifically halfway through it being like, Chris, what are you doing? Because he's hanging in the air with two guys sitting on the wing, and it looks like a huge gamble, but the gamble paid off, and they're the kind of 50-50 moments in playoff games that swing results, as you said. I think you've hit the nail on the head. The stats, not even really worth reading out. It was a tough choice, but the Suns just simply don't win without Chris Paul in this series. You mentioned the cool hand there with the assist to turnover ratio, even though he was a shell of himself, still brought that, and I think the Suns really needed it in certain circumstances. He feels like a Sun now, Max. Like I tweeted it during the series. It was a weird season overall, just coming off the bubble, trying to get your head wrapped around that Chris Paul played for our team and not really feeling like it was real. And it feels real now after winning a series and just seeing what he went through. The tears, that hit me. The hurt that you could see after games in press conferences, the way he just kept throwing himself out there when you knew and you could see that he clearly wasn't even close to 100%. And I think they got the balance between him and Book in this series pretty good. I don't know whether it was quite to the original plan, because obviously they had to adjust some things with how much the Lakers were playing off CP3, but they've really hit their stride in that balance, and it's gotten better and better throughout the regular season. I think they lent on Chris when Book was getting a little bit turnover happy, but he also got Book going in a couple of the big games as well, so that was really cool to see. We're all playing doctors now, Max. What percentage are we going to get in this next series with CP3, do you think?
It's an incredibly hard thing to predict, because I think that when this series starts, he'll be very close to 100%. I just don't know how what can happen to him, right? Because let me frame it this way. So first of all, I love what you said, that he became a Sun in this series. I 100% agree that's what happened, and I think the moment when that happened, at least for me, was when he made the 3 in Game 5. When he made that 3. Do you remember that moment? That was just like,
I do.
Oh, Chris is back. It was just wonderful. It's like he brought himself back for this team. And then, of course, we all know he got hit again. And it looked like it looked. I mean, I don't know about you, David. I'm going to tell something about myself on this podcast right now that shows you how much of a crazy person I am. I literally, my wife will test this. When that happened, I fell onto the floor and I was on face first on the floor for 2.5 minutes. And I was just devastated, because we were up by 30, but Chris Paul, I thought at that point you didn't know, maybe he was done for the whole playoffs, right?
The way he was rolling around, it certainly seemed like it. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, like he was hamming it up or anything. He was in fucking pain.
He was hurt because his stinger got hit, right? And I think that we just aren't gonna know. And the reason why I went that whole tangent was that I think we don't know, right? I think he will look 100. I really think. I mean, when did he look good again? It was when he had 3 days off between Game 3 and Game 4, right?
Yep.
Well, he has that again now. He has 3 games off. Friday. I think he has an extra game off.
Correct.
Or extra day off. So he should look himself, I expect, at the beginning of Game 1. I just don't know if he's going to get hit again, and it's going to happen again. I just don't know. I hope not. I hope it just heals entirely, which I think is possible. But if I had to guess, I think he'll be 100% to start. I think he'll have moments where it nags him, but I think overall he'll be, pretty good. What do you think?
I think that's the perfect way to answer it. It's going to loom over the Suns for as long as they stay in the playoffs. You're going to get close to 100% Chris back probably for the start of the season, for this series, and we're all going to be jumping for joy again that he looks like himself, and then it's only going to take another knock like we saw, and he's potentially questionable again for the next game. What I do know is that he's going to drag himself to start every game that he possibly can. We've already seen that, so I'm not expecting him to miss games. But I do think that, we are unfortunately just one bad play away from, dealing with it all again, and that's just going to loom over everything. The only other thing that I would touch on there is, and you can't get a guy like Chris to do this, but just get yourself out of those situations. Like, I did notice a few times when the Lakers were running him through screens, he was kind of favoring that right shoulder and making sure that he was dipping it down and getting around the screen without contact. So he's definitely in those situations trying to avoid getting hit again. But, like that one with Wes, like just try and put him in positions where he's not boxing out wings coming off the corner three. Like just do everything that you can to take him out of as many of those situations as possible, knowing full well that it's the playoffs and you can't avoid everything like that, Max.
Well, do you remember like a couple minutes before he got hurt? He I can't remember if it was a layup attempt or something, but he flew into the stands basically.
Yes.
And I was like, good God. So I didn't tweet this or anything. I'm not gonna try to take public credit for predicting Chris Paul getting injured or anything like that. But about a minute before he got hurt, I texted Scott Howard, and he'll confirm this if you ask him. And a group of my friends in a group text was like, "Why is he in the game?"
Yeah.
We're up by 30 right now.
Yeah.
He's flying around. This is absurd. And literally a minute after I texted that, he got hurt. And God, I was so nervous, man. I'm just happy it didn't happen. One thing before we go on to our last Sun stuff, I will say this. In our pre-Western Conference Finals podcast, David, I hope we're saying that Chris Paul was 5 stars. That's what I'm hoping for.
Me too, because, we're going to get to it, but they're going to need him in this series for sure. It's definitely no easy beat going from the Lakers to the Nuggets. And, I think that's a good segue. We've got probably a few little Suns Lakers things to finish off here before we move in to the Nuggets series. I'm looking at the clock. We're probably on a 2-hour pace here, but let's make sure we keep it to that, even though I'm sure the listeners are going to hang with us, Max, and we've always said we'll go as long as we need to on these.
All right, so we talked a little before the podcast started. I know we both have 2 small things and 1 big thing each, right?
Yes.
So let's lightning round the small things right now, quick. I'll say it and you give me your reaction and that's it.
Yep, go for it.
We'll go back and forth. Okay, first thing, I'm sure you see me on Twitter complaining about this. I don't like Monty's timeout strategies, David. I fucking hate them. I want him to call timeouts to stymie runs. I want you to say, just real quick, and we'll go on a scale of 1 to 10 overreaction, 1 being I'm not reacting enough, 10 I'm overreacting too much, and 5 I'm reacting adequately. Where do you think I am and how much I'm reacting to Monty's timeouts?
I think you are reacting probably around a 7 or an 8.
Okay.
I think it's worthwhile. Funnily enough, this is my big point, so I won't mention it too much here. But I've been trying to do a better job in the last 12 months of taking everything into an account that both players and coaches specifically do. And I think if that's the one thing we're nitpicking the most about Monty, I think we're in a pretty good spot.
Absolutely agree. Give me your first rapid fire.
Just give me one word for these players. Torrey Craig.
Tough.
Frank Kaminsky.
There's hyphens in this word. Was better in Game 6 than I possibly could have expected. I hope he never plays again.
I thought the silence was the answer there, which I think would have been even better. Dario Saric.
I'm trying to think of one word for this. Middly checked out? I can't do one word. Middly checked out.
Yeah. I'm just going to say 2 things. Dario, I think we're still going to need him at some point.
Yes.
And they need to get him back. Torrey is one spot where you could get Cam some more minutes. I think he's a little bit wild, but I think that they need that overconfidence sometimes.
Denver won't be the series for him.
And they need his athleticism sometimes, and I'm glad he played in the minutes that they did because he did give them something. That's it from me. You can jump to something else.
Anthony Davis should not have been cleared for that game.
No.
We talked about it on Twitter. I mean, it wasn't a mystery. A bunch of us talked about it. You and I privately were. You would attest to this. I was even more emphatic about it. Privately. I think that it was ridiculous. I think the excuses were, he couldn't have hurt himself more, are absurd because he easily could have hurt himself more, even if it's not an injury, just playing that way. She should not have been out there.
Yeah, there's a reason that there's grades to muscle strains, and either he had the highest grade muscle strain and couldn't hurt it more, which is ridiculous that he was out there if that's the case, or he had a lower grade strain and you're admitting that he could have made it worse. So, there's no right answer.
It was an embarrassment. All right, give me your next one.
Quickly, they lost the game on that decision. It took them out of that first quarter entirely, and we saw with their backs against the wall, they threw everything at us in that second half and damn well nearly got back in the game. And I know I was fretting as a Suns fan. If they played that way from the start, who knows how the game would have gone, Max?
You know what? I totally agree with you. I think that they knew he couldn't play in this series really for real, and if he would have come back on Game 7, he would have been the same. So we'll just need to give them a try. I guess I think the Lakers knew they were losing the series, David. That's my hot take.
Yeah.
I think they knew they were losing the series.
All right, I'll throw a question at you around defense. Injuries, poor shooting from the Lakers. How much do we credit the Suns' defense versus maybe just a little bit of luck, and we should be worried that a better shooting team might take advantage of it next series?
Great question. Here's what I'll say. I think we shouldn't be that worried about it because I think the reason why the Lakers shooters were so open is because we were like, hey, Lakers shooters, be open. I think that if we want to guard the shooters, that is what we'll do. That's how I answer that question.
Yeah, I think that there was a stat going around about, all the Lakers shooting throughout the regular season and how it was drastically down outside of LeBron James in this series, and that it was just the worst timing possible for them all to go cold. I think this part of the game's really hard to analyze, and I think advanced defensive numbers also don't help the conversation a lot of the time. I think a lot needs to be said of the Suns making the Lakers make the extra pass and leaving the right shooters open in the right spots. I think they clearly had a game plan around that, and it wasn't just all luck.
Here's the way I'd put that, David. Do you remember all those games where the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Houston Rockets or whoever would shoot their way back into the game against us?
Yep.
Because that's how the NBA regular season works. Everyone just gets to shoot whenever they want. That's why the Lakers shot well in the regular season, guys. It's not because they're good at shooting. It's because everyone shoots well in the regular season.
Yep.
It's easy to shoot well in the regular season. In the playoffs, we shut them down just as we shut the Rockets down. We'd shoot any bad shooting team down. That's how I respond to that.
Yep. What's your big thing?
Okay. Here's my big thing, David. So here's the tunnel we're going down. I wanted to figure out, where does Devin Booker's Game 6 rank among the best playoff games ever played by a Phoenix Suns player?
Ooh.
Okay? So as a proxy for this, I looked up game score. I don't know. You're probably familiar with game score, David. Game score basically just approximates a player's game based on their stats, efficiency, all that stuff.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you a question, David. Turn to the tables here. A little did you know. What do you think is the best Phoenix Suns game score playoff game of all time?
I looked up points-wise. I think Charles Barkley had like 53 or something points-wise, so I'm just going to guess that he did plenty of other things and that was the best one.
56 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals and a block on 23 of 31 shooting was the best. Not only the best in Suns history. Oh, this is the 94 playoffs, by the way, Game 3 against the Warriors first round. Not only was it the best in Suns history, it was the best in NBA history until a few days ago, David. And can you tell me what may have broken that? Not a Suns player.
Luka?
No, it was Dame Lillard in the game, which I don't blame you for not watching it, David, because we had a game going on as well. But actually, that game, that was crazy to see. That game unseated the Barkley game for the greatest game score of all time. Thought that was crazy.
Unbelievable.
But so anyway, to go on, so Suns history. So the next two after that are Barkley, Game 5 and Game 7 against the Sonics. That's literally the next two games in order. And then the next two after that are KJ against the Houston Rockets in Game 4 and Game 7 of a series they lost.
Wow.
Game 6, David, was Devin Booker. He had the 6th best game score in NBA history, and in my Suns history. And in my opinion, David, I want to hear your opinion on this. I'm going to give him the 4th best game ever because KJ lost that series. And I just don't think it was as impressive as what game Booker did in his first series against LeBron, carrying this team where he was like clearly the best player in his first. It's just, in my opinion, David, and then I'll turn it to you to comment on. I think he had the 4th best playoff game in Suns history.
I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but you know that I'm all for removing KJ from any history books possible. Right. So you're not going to get any pushback from me on elevating Booker another rung in that letter.
So if he had the best playoff game of any Sun not named Barkley, that seems important, right?
In his first series too, and at 24, 23 years of age or whatever he is, and we've got him under contract for many, many years to come. So if that's what he's doing now, I think he has a chance to top Barkley by the end of it, Max.
2 other games in this series, David, in this particular series, cracked the Suns' top 100 of the all-time game scores. Can you guess what those were?
One's got to be DeAndre.
No.
And maybe both? No?
Guess again.
Booker's Game 1.
That's one of them.
Booker's Game 5.
That's the other one, David.
There you go.
They were his game 5 was the 81st best game score in Suns playoff history, and his game 1 was the 89th
Amazing.
best game score in Suns playoff history. David, I think it's fair to say that Devin Booker had a good series.
I think it's fair to say that he had a very, very good series. I can't wait to see his next one too, Max.
All right, give me your last one, David, before Did You Know?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this before, so I won't labour the point too much, but I think, I listened to every post-match presser that Monty did, as I mentioned. I'm just so impressed with him as a leader. As I mentioned before, I've tried to look more, and think differently about coaching than I, have previously over the last 12 months or so. It's really, really hard. I thought tactically he beat Vogel in this series. You throw in what a leader he is, and man, what a coach. I had down here before you made that note about the timeouts. I still think there's moments in game that are frustrating, but his preparation is top class. So you throw all that in together.
Yes.
And if you can only nitpick at a few in-game adjustments, you're probably talking about a pretty good coach in the NBA. And, it was his first playoff win. So, this is something we tackled back when we had the regular pod, how we were going to think and feel about Monty when it got to this part. And I think huge tick from the first series. Not a 10 out of 10 for reasons that you mentioned. But by God, some of the negativity that I had and that I saw when we hired Monty around, he'll be great during the regular season, all the leadership stuff is real, blah blah blah, but you'll feel it when you get to the playoffs. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong, Max.
Well, by the way, at the time, the criticism of he'll be great in the regular season, but he'll be bad in the playoffs. It's like, okay, great, good. We need someone who's good in the regular season.
Yeah.
I never understood that. But yeah, David, part of the reason why I hate the timeout thing so much is because I really just love his out of timeouts lately, his out of timeout plays.
Yeah.
So when we're losing a lead, I think we need to stop the momentum. It's partly because I think that we can come out of the timeout and score and stop the bleeding a little bit. That's why I want him to do it so much. I love so much of what Monty is doing that I think it's why it frustrates me so much.
Yeah.
If it were a coach I didn't respect in any aspect, I'd be like, well, I expect this. Like Cliff Kingsbury. I'm not as mad because I'm like, I know he sucks. So I don't care. This guy's he's terrible.
Yeah.
But Monty, I think is really good. So that one flaw in his coaching, just in my opinion, maybe people disagree, is the only thing. But no, I otherwise, I mean, bro, we just beat LeBron and the Lakers in the playoffs. So what am I going to say about Monty Williams? Are you kidding me? We were winning 19 games before he got here.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more, and I just wanted to make sure we gave him the shout out that he deserved because first playoff win for the coach. So congrats. And
because we're not going to talk about it all this series, the rest of the podcast, I don't think. Again, we just quickly just say thank you, James Jones. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the same. We appreciate it. All right, David, how about Did You Know?
All right, Max, the natural way to go with this one was looking ahead to the Denver Nuggets. So did you know the Suns have a 6-3 all-time record against the Nuggets in the playoffs, but have never played them past the first round? Max, running in chronological order, we start back in 1982, a 2-1 win to Phoenix. Then again, the next season in 1983, where the Nuggets got us back with the same scoreline 2-1. Finally, Max, we fast forward to 1989, a Suns 3-0 sweep over the Nuggets in the first round. That's 30 years since we have met Denver in the playoffs and never in a 7-game series. In fact, we've never even gone to 4 games, which we will definitely do in this playoffs. But first batch of questions, Max, that 1989 team. Let's see how much you know or remember about them. Probably no, considering we were both pretty young around this time. At 25.7 points per game, who was the leading scorer on that team, Max?
Was Kevin Johnson that then?
His name will come up. I'll give you a clue. Booker broke.
Tom Chambers?
Correct. Didn't even need the clue. Well done. At 12.2 assists per game, this one's going to be easy for you now. Who was the starting point guard on that team, Max?
I've got to guess it's Kevin Johnson.
Yep. Which ex-Suns coach started in the backcourt with KJ?
Oh, man. Hornacek.
Correct. And finally, an easy one to make it 4 from 4. Which current Suns employee and friend of yours, Max, was sixth man and second leading scorer on that team?
Maybe our announcer, Eddie Johnson, I have to guess.
Correct. But Max, like I seem to do in this segment a lot, I lied to you. There's one more player from that team that I want you to try and name. He was a rookie who averaged 8.6 points per game in that 88-89 season. But I'll give you a few more clues first. 2 years later, in his third season, he was still on the Suns and moved to the following stats. I want you to remember these stats specifically, Max, if you can. 13.6 point per game, 5.4 rebounds, 2.8 assists, and 1.4 steals per game in just 30 minutes a night. Any ideas who this player is, Max?
Dan Marley?
It was, of course, none other than Dan Marley, a much-loved son who even has an award named after him to this day, the Hustle Award. Another quick hitter, Max, do you know who won the Dan Marley Hustle Award this season?
I think I saw a bunch of fans debating whether it be Torrey Craig or Campaign. I think wasn't it Mikal?
It was Mikal Bridges. You are on fire today. And Max, this is where I need you to repeat those stats, but doesn't matter if you don't remember them, because Mikal just won Dan's award in his third season, and as you and the listeners know, those stats were also Marley's third season too. So first, points per game. Can you remember what I said for Dan Marley?
You said 13 something, right?
13.6, and Max Mikal averaged 13.5 with the Suns in his third season this season. Next, rebounds.
Was it 5?
5.4, slightly ahead of Mikal at 4.3. Assists, Max?
I think you said 3.
Just under, 2.8, and Mikal had 2.1 this season, and steals to round us out. What did Dan have?
1.5?
1.4 for Marley, and Bridges averaged...
Hey, that was pretty good, David.
That was very, very good, because I went through that very quickly. Bridges averaged 1.1 for the Suns this season. But here's an easy game before we end now, Max. Let's jump ahead to Dan Marley's fourth season on the Suns, and let's see if Mikal can match his stats before his rookie deal ends. Quick game of, easy game of over-under here for you. So Dan jumped to 17.3 points per game in his fourth year. Over-under for Mikal next year.
Oh, wow. I think under, just because I think the team will still be very good with a lot of good scorers on it, but that's coming for sure. Soon.
Yep. Important one here, Dan averaged 3.7 free throw attempts that season, and for comparison, Mikal had just 1.8 this season. Over or under?
No, I'll go to 3. I'll go to 3 even.
Final stat, Marley jumped to 3.3 assists that year. I think this is an important one for Mikal next year. Can he make a leap and beat that next season?
Where was he at again this year? About 2.8? Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah.
Man, I would like to see, I'd like to see like high 3s out of him.
Yep, me too. Now, one of my classics to round out the segment here, Max, the 88-89 playoff run we've been discussing came after the franchise's third longest playoff drought in history. 3 seasons without a postseason visit, and then a trip to the Western Conference Finals. The second longest playoff drought came early, between 1970 and 1976, where the Suns went 5 seasons on the outside looking in, but then made it to the NBA Finals on their return. So Max, the longest playoff drought is the one we just broke. 10 plus seasons with no playoff games, but now we are back with a bang. And if you are following the trend here, we may very well go from Western Conference Finals to NBA champs. And with that, Max, Did You Know is over for another episode. We can get a little more serious about the Phoenix Suns versus the Denver Nuggets now.
You've had a lot of good Did You Know endings in our podcast history, David. That was definitely the best one that you've ever had. That was, oh man, I think we're going to win now. I love that. That's fantastic. All right, Denver, David. We are. I know we just spent the last hour and 26 minutes.
Yep.
Lauding the Suns for what they just did. As they like to say, and as they are very clear about, they're not done yet, are they, David?
They are not even close. Let me set it up for you a bit here. Denver beat Portland 4-2. Their likely starting 5, or at least the one that was last series, is Campazzo at point guard, Austin Rivers at shooting guard, Aaron Gordon at small forward, or you could argue power forward, a guy you mentioned before, Michael Porter Jr. at the other forward spot, and Nikola Jokic playing center. Game 1 is on Monday, then Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. The reason I mention that is for everyone playing at home, you'll realize that there's only 1 day off in between every single game unless we go to 7 games here, Max, and that's going to be important with the altitude that you have to deal with in Denver. For the Aussies listening to the podcast, just remember that's 1 day ahead of time for all of us, which means Game 3 is the only one that falls on a weekend for us. And their key bench players, you've got Monty Morris, Paul Millsap, Jermichael Green, Marcus Howard, Sun favourite Shaq Harrison is even on the bench, and maybe JaVale McGee might see some minutes in this series. Max, where do you want to go to first?
Real quick, I just want to say that, I'm very happy for the 3-day break for Chris Paul's health, and, like you said, for the altitude, you got to get the rest. But, man, the game being on a Monday instead of a Sunday is a real bummer for people who want to go to it. I guess Sunday's a better day to go to a game than a Monday. So that's a bummer. But anyway, I will say, I think the most important thing to me in this whole series, David, is how the Suns decide they want to defend Nikola Jokic. Whenever you have a star who is really, really good at scoring and passing, you have to decide which one you're going to try to take away. And my favorite example of this is, do you remember, I know you remember, 2005 playoffs that Nash, when the Dallas decided to make him just a scorer in that one game, and he scored 48 points?
Yep. And, we've talked about it. Yeah, we've talked about it a bit. The Spurs used to do it to him quite a bit too.
Absolutely. And I think that we got to make that decision on Nikola. I think he's the same kind of player as Nash. Do you want him to just try to score, or do you want him to be the playmaker guy? And I don't know what your answer to that is, David, but I'm very, very interested to know.
I know what my question is, because it's in big, bold block letters at the very top of my page, and it's exactly what you just asked. How are you guarding him? So we are very much on the same page with this one. I will say, in the Blazers series, 33 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists. Versus the regular season, 26.4 points per game, 10.8 rebounds, and 8.3 assists. So I can tell you how Portland guarded him, and that was they turned him more into a scorer, less of a passer, and that's definitely what the stats suggest. And some may argue, because they lost the series, that it didn't work. But I am here to tell you and the listeners, Max, that I would argue the opposite. I think that they just didn't have the rest of the pieces to get over the top. But I think the argument is there that it worked, and I think that's the argument that I'm going to make. We need to turn him into a scorer and limit the playmaking to get the others involved, because they're already shorthanded, and we don't need guys like Porter, who we mentioned being scared of before, jumping up and adding, I guess, to his scoring in this series, Max.
I fully agree with you. I didn't have all the background that you had on that, but I didn't know that. I actually didn't even really realize. I didn't watch a lot of the Portland-Denver series because it was weird to start, and then they were at the same time as our games.
Yes.
Which is annoying. But I didn't quite realize that that's what the choice they made. But you're right. I did see that he averaged like 4 assists, so I probably should have put it together from that. But it makes a lot of sense, and I agree with you. I think that it's the right strategy, particularly because Chris Vernon on the Mismatch podcast, they had a great stat that the Blazers were plus 45 with Nurkic on the floor and minus 53 without him on the floor. I think they had like one guy who could guard Jokic, and I actually just have a lot of faith that Ayton can do it. I think he showed that he won't be a guy who will get in foul trouble. I think I have a lot of faith in him on that perspective now, after what we saw in the Lakers series, and I also just have a lot of faith that he won't fall for the little tricks that Nikola Jokic does quite as much. He's just so sound now. He's not going to do anything besides just put his hands up. That's all he does. You can't get into his head.
Yep.
That's what I thought that you could before, and I think that very thing with him is going to make it so the right play, just to let him do that and everyone else guard the shooters and just guard those guys. Have Mikal play the passing lanes, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think the great thing is we've got lots of games between these two guys to look back on and gain confidence. So you add that with what we just saw from Ayton in his first playoff series against another dominant big in Anthony Davis, and you can be confident and feel like DeAndre is going to be able to hold up to the task. I'll throw a few other things in that I found in the two Blazers wins in the series. Nikola was only 46.7% from the field and only averaged 1 assist in those games. So again, that points to the fact that when the Blazers were able to win, they turned him into a inefficient or less efficient scorer than what he normally is, at least, and pretty much took his passing out entirely, only with 1 assist per game in those 2 games. And Nurk made him work as well. I think in the wins, Nurk had 16.5 points per game versus in the losses 11.5. And I think I know we're going over time here, so just go back and listen to the last pod, guys, and my big rant about putting Anthony Davis through as much action as possible and making him work on the defensive end to limit his offensive prowess, because I think that's exactly what they need to do with Jokic here. And Ayton has just as much of a role to play on that end in making Nikola work than he does when he actually has to guard him on the other end, Max.
Yep, I think we totally agree on this. The only addendum that I'll make is that I think that, because Denver has some guys who might just not be able to shoot, necessarily Campazzo.
Yep.
I think if he's on Campazzo's side, like the guy who's guarding Campazzo from 3 can probably lurch in a little bit and try to mess with Jokic too. Mm-hmm. They can do a little bit of that with the shooters, because I think that I don't trust the shooters. But overall, we're totally on board. Just guard him, single up. Let's make him a score to start with and see how it goes.
Yeah, and they've got those reps too with Davis. A bit of chemistry there between Crowder and Ayton as well. So I wouldn't be afraid to let Crowder guard him when he's hovering around the perimeter, because he's got that core lower body strength to push him around. I don't think I could imagine Nikola is going to get exactly to where he wants to go if he turns his back to the basket and tries to do that, backing down when he's got a small switched onto him as he would with Crowder. So, I'm not saying do it all the time, but I'm not going to be panicked if occasionally Crowder's the one that gets switched onto him out on the perimeter. That's kind of the shot that I want him to take. I don't want him to getting down low with those little bunnies that he has, because his touch is just so good.
You know what's nice, Dave, is that we can talk about these defensive strategies and actually have confidence that the Suns will execute them. That's one moment. Sorry to go back to the Lakers series. I hope no one listener will mind that I'm going back to the Lakers series that we just won. But one moment that we should talk about just real quickly is just the first game, how locked in they came defensively, how on a string they were, how prepared. You mentioned with Monty prepared before.
Yep. They
were so prepared for that, and it gives you a lot of confidence that whatever we decide to do in this series, we'll at least execute it well.
Yeah, it makes me really confident for those first 2 games. I'm really glad that Denver actually finish them off so they can focus on who their opponent is for these next 3 or 4 days, instead of waiting for who wins the next game and then starting to prepare, or having to prepare for both and then having to throw half of your work out. So I mentioned it before, I think the Suns coaching staff as a whole is a very, very good preparation collective, and I think they're going to come with a good game plan.
Could not agree more. All right, do you want to do your next one? It's something we both knocked our big one out of the way, so we probably have a few more that are a little smaller left.
I think this will be a quick one, and it's related to what we just talked about. It may even be rhetoric, and there's just the silence that we heard before with the Frank Kaminsky question. What's plan B if Ayton gets in foul trouble?
Oh man, there really kind of isn't one, is there? I guess it's Jay Crowder and Craig, and you probably play them at the same time and just kind of try to rush him when he gets the ball. At that point, I think you're just relying. At that point, you turn him into a passer. I think you're just like, hey, at this point, if we make Jokic a scorer, then he'll score every time, and that doesn't work. So we'll just have to make him pass and hope the guys like Campazzo and Austin Rivers and Monte Morris and the guys who aren't proven just miss shots.
Yeah, and with the guys missing from the Nuggets that make this, I guess, a easier series to look at versus if Murray and Dozier and some of the other guys missing. Barton, I think, is the other one. Maybe that is a plausible plan B, instead of just trying to guard him the same way with a much lesser talent in Dario or Frank. Maybe you completely switch it at that point and make other guys punish you as your plan B. I like that. I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good suggestion from you.
I do think it's going to be a series where adjustments are going to be more important than the last series was.
Yep.
I think it's going to be a lot back and forth, a lot of weird adjustments. All right, let me ask you this one. So I just want to run down the Denver guards real quick, right? Mm-hmm. The minutes leaders at guard in the playoffs for the Denver Nuggets so far have been Austin Rivers with 33.6, Monte Morris with 29.4, Facundo Campazzo with 27.6, and Marcus Howard with 15.3 minutes a game. In the regular season, those guys averaged 8.7, 10.2, 6.1, and 2.8 points, respectively. They were all sub-average efficiency, every single one of them. Other than Campazzo against Portland, those guys were just much better offensively.
Yep.
Austin Rivers shot 48.4 from 3 in that series. Marcus Howard shot 45% from 3, and Monty Morris shot 41.7% from 3. So, Morris I'm a little scared of, a little bit. I think he's pretty good. Mm-hmm. He had 28 in Game 5, 22 in Game 6, closing out Portland. Hits some big shots. Like, he's a guy I think could have a good series against us. But, man, why should I be afraid of these people? I get Jokic as the MVP. I totally understand. But, oh, my God, their guard situation, David, is a tire fire.
It really is. I don't want to get or sound too cocky here, but I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. And I think the point that I would make here is it's a really good... justification for going hard the entire season and getting the number 2 seed, because they can come out here and win the first 2 games and really throw the first punch and just kind of, to your point, go, who are these guys? Like, we're much better than these guys. Yep. They're not gonna shoot those numbers that they did against the Blazers. The Suns, and the Blazers, everyone knows it, are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Defensively. We may struggle with Nikola Jokic, and that's because he's, the MVP of the NBA, not officially yet, but will be very soon. Yep. So he may still beat us up, but those other guys aren't going to do that against us. We're too good defensively. I agree with you. I think Monte Morris has had some moments against the Suns in the past, so there's some PTSD there. I think he's the only one that I'm really worried about. I'm not worried about Austin Rivers having 2 huge playoff series back to back. Campazzo, not worried about. I tweeted earlier today, I think the biggest worry with him is him potentially getting under Chris Paul's skin and Paul punching him in the nose and getting suspended for a few games, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. I think anyone can do this, not to talk down to your point, because I think it's a valid one to bring up when we're talking about this series, but you just look at these 2 rosters stacked against each other, and it's just night and day that the guard rotation for the Suns is just way and above what the Nuggets can currently roll out. To throw back to Campaign, he's the one that can probably really have an impact here and be the guy that kind of shows how strong we are at that position. Not to mention, of course, that Chris Paul and Devin Booker should be able to capitalize too. But I do have another question later in regards to at least one of those guys for something that I think the Nuggets might try outside of their guard rotation with Devin Booker. So, I think it's a very key thing to talk about here, and clearly the thing or the place in the Nuggets defense that the Suns can manipulate the most, Max.
I would really like to know. I wish we had a 7 seconds or less intern, which is hard to afford when you don't actually have a real podcast anymore and never earn money. But I would love to have somebody look up how many times a team has won a playoff series when they didn't have one of the 3 best guards in the series. I can't imagine it happens all that often, right? Can't be
and it's probably in a series where there's a super dominant big man, which just takes us full circle back to the first point of, can you just neutralize Nikola just enough where the other guys don't matter at all, Max?
And listen, we may not. And I think we can win this series with Nikola Jokic having a historic series. I truly believe that. But what will kill us, I think, David, what I'm most concerned about in this series, because I expect Nikola Jokic to kill us, is Michael Porter Jr.
Yeah, and
because that guy, oh my God, dude, he can't. When he's hot, there's nothing you can do about it because he'll make the shot anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue. We may as well go into it now. The question that I actually had down was who's the third guy that you worry about the most, but let's change that now and just go let's talk about the second guy, which is a very obvious pick. To go off everything we've spoken about and then lead into this discussion. God, it's tough. Welcome to the playoffs, young guys. Ayton and Mikal go from LeBron James and Anthony Davis to now having to be the primary guys probably on Jokic and Michael Porter Jr. And I think it means it's another huge series for Mikal. Porter probably needs to average 20 points per game for them to have a chance to win this series. And I think, Mikal's strengths, he has the length to bother such a big shooter from the perimeter. You've said it, Porter if he rises up and is comfortable in his spot, there's pretty much no one that's guarding it. But I think Mikal can do enough to bother him. And I actually really like that matchup. And the other guy, like you touched on before, I think Cam can throw some possessions at him too and really bother him. And that's where the drafting of the Suns and James Jones might really come in handy, knowing that wings are worth their weight in gold at this time of the season, Max.
David, honestly, you just made me more confident about this series than I already was, and I was already pretty confident about it. I didn't really think about the matchup of Mikal on Michael Porter Jr., but you're right. He might be tailor-made to guard Michael Porter Jr. He might be the best Michael Porter Jr. guarder in the league, because the thing Mikal struggles with is his strength, right? He gets back down, right?
Yeah.
But Michael Porter Jr. that's not the kind of thing he does. He wants to shoot the ball, right? He wants to get hot from three.
All the time. And
so, that's a perfect matchup for Mikal.
Yeah, and I'm fine with then Crowder and Aaron Gordon going at it. Crowder might struggle a little bit with Gordon's athleticism, but I'm fine with that cross match. I actually feel quite good about it. And as I said, if you do get into some tricky situations, I think Cam Johnson can do a pretty good job on Porter as well. So, and both of those guys, and we'll get into this as well, can hopefully exploit Porter at the other end.
Yeah, and honestly, again, what you just said made me more confident about this series. Jay Crowder, I'm not worried about Jay Crowder guarding Gordon. Are you kidding me? You think Gordon's going to take off the dribble and shoot? What's Gordon going to do?
Exactly.
Gordon's not the kind of player. He's a dependent offensive player. That's why Jokic is a great fit with him, right?
Yeah.
Because he's a dependent offensive player. He needs somebody to create for him. That sounds fine.
So we're not worried.
Man, David, I keep out of that more excited.
Yeah, we're not worried about the third guy, and maybe we're not that worried about the second guy. That's the answer to those questions, Max.
I am glad you brought up the third guy though, because I do think Aaron Gordon, there's not really. It's a weird series for him, right? He was brought in to guard LeBron and to do that kind of thing, but there's not really a wing scorer on this team.
No, and I think we may as well jump to it now. I think he's guarding Devin Booker in this series, Max.
Yeah, I think that makes sense in some aspects, but I don't think it's going to work. Do you?
No, I think he's a better option than any of those guards that you listed off, maybe outside of Monte Morris. It is another question that I had down. We may as well just throw them all out in this mixed bag right now. Maybe they look to start Morris to guard Booker, so they don't have too bad defensive matchups in the backcourt of the Suns starting lineup. But yeah, I think Gordon will probably do the best job of any of those guys, but I think Booker's still got him covered. A lot of again, what we saw in this Lakers series is going to hold Booker in good stead for taking Aaron Gordon off the dribble into the paint. And if that shot from Game 6 can stay on trend, I think it'll be lights out for Gordon very, very quick. But I also think that Mikal needs to step up if that's the case, because it's going to put a guard onto Mikal in that instance. And we need to see him, we gave him a pass for the Lakers series, but if that does eventuate, this would be a series where I think the pressure would really ramp up and they'd have to rely on Mikal to be a bit more of an offensive threat, Max.
Well, one thing that I was thinking before this, and actually this conversation changed my mind a little bit, because I wasn't thinking about Mikal on MPJ, but I think that is the right move.
Yep.
But if for whatever reason that's not what they go with and they have somebody else on him, I really like the idea of, if we're going to guard Jokic with one guy with Ayton, having Mikal kind of quote unquote guard Campazzo and just play free safety, basically.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea of that too, because not only would that be really fun to watch, it would also really free him up to play offensively, right? He wouldn't have to log down on one guy and be so focused.
Yes.
I think he'd have a much better offensive. He'd be free flowing more in the game,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It gives them another option to go to. Maybe they start out that way and then go to my strategy if they're struggling a little bit to keep Porter cold from the outside. So that'll be really interesting thing to see in those first couple of games. You got anything else? What other questions you got?
We kind of went into this a little bit already, but I'll ask you if you have any more to fill in. So the thing that I actually really liked talking about last time was the who would be more important or less important in the series thing.
Yep.
I think we were kind of wrong when we said for the most part.
Yep.
But I still liked it. I did learn a big lesson though, David. It's that I'm never ever saying that Booker loses importance relative to anybody ever again, because he's always the most important in every series. I'm going to go on record with that right now. But I do want to ask you though, all that aside, do you think that there are anybody besides Mikal, we talked about, or maybe Ayton also with Jokic, who becomes more important in this series?
Yeah, I think I don't think he's more important, but I think DA is probably the most important player for this series. I know that probably goes against what you just said about, you should probably have Booker at the top no matter what, but I think he is super, super important. I mentioned his name before. I think Cam Payne becomes really important again in this series because, the top 5, maybe 6 of the Nuggets rotation basically have to play out of their minds to win this series against the Suns, and the strength of the Suns is their depth. So everyone knows that as rotations reduce in the playoffs, the depth is a less valuable commodity. But I think if you're talking still guys 6, 7, 8, you can really have value there. So I think he's really important, and I touched on it with Mikal. I think he's no more important in this series again than the last one. So I think it's probably pretty similar to what we mentioned last time, but noting the mistakes that we made in the way that we ranked them, and probably adjusting as we have this entire conversation, admitting to some of those mistakes, Max.
Well, you certainly were right. We were right about Jay Crowder, at least.
Yes.
We were right. He was important.
True.
No, I love you bringing up Cam Payne. I think Cam Payne is so important because, I was a little mockingly earlier talking about, when would a playoff team ever lose a series where they have the 3 best guards in the series?
Yeah.
I think the way it would happen is if they don't actually have the 3 best guards in the series, because that supposed advantage didn't come through, right? So I think that Cam Payne needs to be that guy. He needs to be like... He needs to make it very clear to everybody watching that, the Suns have the 3 best guards in this series, and it's very obvious, right? And I think that we focus a lot on shoring up weaknesses when we're talking about how a team can win a series.
Yeah.
But we should maybe talk a little more about exploiting strengths.
Mm-hmm.
We have to exploit that strength. Booker, Paul, and Payne need to just kill them. I think that is the way that we win this series fairly easily because, that's our advantage, right?
Yeah, and, you throw in the question mark on the health of CP3 and Payne becomes even more important because to take that analogy that you've got, I don't think there's any world where Booker's not the best guard in this series, but then if Paul is reduced and Payne has a really bad series and all of a sudden, Monte Morris is the second best guard in the series, Austin Rivers is the third, and maybe even Campazzo's the fourth, that's when you can get yourself in trouble even if Booker plays out of his mind and is clearly the best guard in the series. So yeah, lots of importance on Cam Payne, I think. And then I guess touching on that point, and I touched on before with getting Jokic in as much action as possible, like we discussed with Anthony Davis on the last episode, I saw Portland in the bits that I have watched of the game so far. They've got no rim protection. So if you can get Jokic out on the perimeter in some action, the guards can really feast on the back line because particularly if Gordon is tasked with guarding Devin Booker, if Booker's in the action and then you've also throwing Jokic into the action or with some misdirection on the weak side of the floor, that lane and the rim is just going to be wide open and the guards are small too. So I think that's how they really exploit this Denver defense is get Jokic in as much as possible, and if they do go Gordon on Booker, then you've just got to use it against him because the alternative is to guard Booker straight up with one of the guards, and then you do have a little bit more rim protection and backline defense with Aaron Gordon, but I just don't think they're going to have that luxury, so you can definitely use that against them in this series, Max.
Could not agree more. I actually, thinking about that, what you just said, maybe a question that I want to ask you, and maybe this can be one of the last things we do before 7 seconds or less.
Yep.
But if you were a Denver Nuggets podcaster right now, talking to me, fellow Denver Nuggets podcaster, what would you be saying about how you guard the Suns' best lineup? You would say it's Booker, Paul. You would say the starting lineup. What do you do with Booker? I feel like if I were a Nuggets podcaster, I'd be really concerned.
And I think they probably are really concerned. In fact, I've seen some of them. I think Denver's got some of the best coverage from beat writers across the league. Ryan Blackburn does a great job. Of course, I'm putting myself on the spot here. McBride is the other last name of one of them, and I've seen them talking about it already. They're scared of guarding Devin Booker for one. So I think if I was coach or I was Nuggets podcaster, like you put the question to me, I'd put Monte Morris into the starting lineup, and I would guard Devin Booker with Gordon. I'd guard Mikal with Monte Morris. I would then have I guess one of Austin Rivers or Campazzo on Chris Paul, and if he's healthy, good luck, guys. Yeah. And then you've got Porter on Crowder, which I'm sure they're fine with, because he can probably bother Crowder quite a bit. And then obviously you've got Jokic on Ayton. So, they might feel okay about that, but, Chris Paul obviously can damage his matchup. And, whilst Gordon's the best defender that they've got to throw at Booker, we've already discussed quite a few times that I still think that Booker is going to be able to exploit that matchup, because Gordon's much more suited to big wing types who are a little bit slower with the first step and things. Book's really going to be able to attack him on the drive. And as I said, if you get Jokic and Porter away from the rim, even though they're not great there to begin with, Booker's just going to walk straight into layups.
I have not one nit to pick with anything you just said, David.
Great.
I agree with all
like
of it.
that.
I agree with all of it exactly. It's just going to be a really hard series for Denver, in my opinion. They don't seem to have the horses at guard and wing, honestly, even. They have a lot of really good big guys.
Yep.
And I worked against Portland. Portland can't play defense. I think it's going to be a little harder for them in this series. You made me think about it again. You mentioned it earlier. I really can't wait for the Chris Paul Campazzo matchup. I think it has a real chance to be like an all-timer in terms of just how much they hate each other throughout the course of the series.
Yep.
It's going to be really funny, man.
There's a regular season game that I'm definitely going to go back and watch before this series starts, where I think Chris Paul has some Team USA history with him as well, and you can tell literally every time down, they were trying to hide Campazzo on somebody else, maybe Mikhail or someone, I'm not sure, because it wouldn't have been Booker. And oh god, it was funny. Chris Paul was literally calling Campazzo into screens every single time and getting switched onto him, and it was just bucket after bucket after bucket. So yeah, I really hope we get healthy Chris Paul in these first 2 games at least, because I think he's going to exploit the hell out of that. Let's try and, get under 2 hours here, or around about. 2 quick things.
Alrighty.
I said Book is going to feel like he's dropped down a level. I think it's going to feel like going from pros back to college defensively after that Lakers series, Max. He's just going to feel like he's got so much space compared to what the Lakers gave him. And pace. I think we learnt late in the series against the Lakers, particularly the second unit should really pick it up. Yep. Denver, the Suns play slow. Denver plays even slower. So we should really try and learn from that. And go fast in the right situations and try and muck up their kind of half-court offense a little bit.
Yeah, no, I completely and totally agree with that. I think I would say on that, so Game 4, I really wanted to get the pace in. That's why I wanted to maybe possibly start Campaign and Cam Johnson in that game.
Yeah.
Because I envisioned that as the way to get out of it. I was wrong entirely about the execution of the idea.
Yep.
But I think that is the right idea for this team, especially against a team like Denver who wants to play slow anyway.
Agreed.
Okay, well, should we go to 7 seconds or less, David?
Let's do it.
All right, you guys all know the rules by now. I'm not going to repeat them for the first time in history.
Love it.
We're going to do both, like we always do now these days. Do you want to go first, Dave? Or you want me to go first?
I'll go first, Max. You'll notice a trend with my questions this week. Question 1 last time was Booker game winner, Paul triple-double, or Payne 20-point game. Your guess was Payne, and you were 1 point short. He got 19 in one of the games in the Lakers series. I'll give you a different group this series. Ayton, 5 blocks, Mikhail, 25 points, Booker, triple-double.
That one actually isn't hard. Mikhail, 25 points.
Love it.
I just think Mikhail is ready to have a real series on offense this time.
Yeah, I actually added at 20 points to start with and went, he's easily getting 20, so I had to move it to 25, but I still think...
Yeah, 25 makes it tougher, for sure.
Yeah. All right, your turn.
Okay, I also have ones that are similar to last time, so the last one. So last time I asked you who you prefer to play in the second round. Now we're here in the second round, so how about the conference finals? I don't know if you saw the Clippers just beat Dallas.
Okay, I didn't see that. That's good.
Kawhi maybe had a better game than Booker. It was close. I didn't see the whole thing at all. I saw the stats. It looks very close to Booker's game.
Yep.
So I gave you that to pick between the 3. So who do you want to play the most of these 3? And then the second most and then the least?
I think I'd want to play... Oh, God, this is hard. I'm going to sound really stupid based on what's happened so far. I think I'd rather play Dallas first.
No, I agree with that because of what we saw tonight. You didn't see it. I just caught my eye. That was scary from the Clippers.
Yeah, it's just easier to guard them. Like, Luka might still have a ridiculous series, but the just game planning for it is easier. And, he's potentially hobbled with a similar injury to Chris Paul. So I've got to take him first. I would actually go Utah second we're there against them. We always have been. I'm not scared of them. I think we've got the matchup to play them. And therefore, I'd go Clippers third, if that was even the group that I'm supposed to rank.
You rate the exact right group, David, and I agree with your exact ranking. I was close between Utah and Clippers. I couldn't figure it out. But then I realized that if we were playing the Clippers, it meant they just beat they came back with 3-2 against the Mavericks and beat the Utah Jazz without home court. So I'd be more scared of the Clippers in that scenario.
There's more questions, just way more questions. It's not a great matchup.
Nope. All right, you're up.
Question 2 last time was which bench player might start. That didn't eventuate even with Paul's injury, and I am not tempting fate again. So instead, Max, slightly different. Which bench player will be the most important in the next series?
You know what? I'm going to go a little out of the box on this one. I'm going to go with my man, Cam Johnson, who I praised earlier.
I thought you might.
I think he could have a really, really good offensive series with the way they play defense. He could just be crazy in the series.
Cool. I like it. Go to number 2.
Last time we both asked each other about Chris Paul's future.
We did.
Cam Payne's going to get paid, David. How much is Cam Payne going to get paid, and who are we going to be the ones paying it?
Is this your second question or your third?
This is my second question.
All right. You've stolen part of my third here, so okay. There's always crossover, which I love. So I'm a little bit prepared. I'm going to write about this at some point, but I may as well put a little bit of it in here now. I don't think people realize we can probably pay Cam Payne somewhere around $10 million a year because of early bird rights and average salary in the NBA. I think it's going to take close to that. The thing with backup point guards is I don't think there'll be a heap of teams knocking down the door to come and poach Cam Payne to play backup point guard, and I don't think, even though what he has done and what we said about believing in his stats, I don't think there'll be many teams, or if any, that'll come to give him a starting opportunity. So I think we're in the box seat, and I reckon we'll probably get him for 3 years, 24 mil or something like that, which I'm totally fine with Chris Paul returning to, Max.
I think it'll be a little higher than that. I think it'll be probably the full MLE, but we don't give him the MLE. Like you said, we can do that with his exception.
Yeah.
But it's about the same amount, right? Isn't the full MLE like basically $10 million next year? It's around there.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. And that'd be great because we could get somebody else, too, in that scenario. I will say that the one scenario where that doesn't happen is if he just goes, we win the title, or get to the finals, and he's awesome the whole way. Then someone may give him $20 million to be their starter.
Yes, yeah. I'm answering the question now instead of at the end when we've holding the trophy up and Cam Payne is somehow Finals MVP, Max.
I certainly hope so. All right, I think you have one more than I have one more.
Yep, number 3, last time in this slot was Chris Paul, as you just mentioned, and his future with the team, which interestingly came up in the news the other day, but I'm not going to touch that this time around. And you just asked the Cam Payne one, so I'll jump to the second part of the question instead. Ayton and Bridges, do they both get their extensions this year, Max?
Yeah, I think so. I think what ends up happening is Chris Paul opts out, does it long-term here, 3 years, brings the cap down a little bit. We sign Cam Payne. We signed somebody with that MLE that's kind of intriguing, and we give those guys giant extensions. And then I think
cool.
This is my other prediction. I think Robert Sarver sells the team. I think that's coming.
He got his ring and sold out.
I hope that's whether he gets it or not. I think he sells it. I think he's like, hey, I can sell this for so much money right now. So yeah, that's what I think happens.
Cool.
All right. I know the story isn't fully written yet, David, but so far, based on what you've seen, where do you rank this team among 21st century Suns teams, and how good you think they are? Not your personal attachment to them, just how good you think the team is.
We did a little bit of this last episode in Did You Know, kind of comparing a couple of teams, and I think you chose more current players than you did past, which was a little bit of a window into it.
A little bit, yeah.
I don't know if I'm just so kind of hurt by the lack of defense that most of the good Suns teams of the 21st century played, but I think I'm rolling with this one, Max. It just feels like a playoff team, and we might get knocked out in this next round, but I don't know. I don't know about you. None of those Suns teams of the part, I just felt like everything had to break our way. I don't even think we played our best basketball in this first series, and the Lakers are, pretty phenomenal first round matchup. I think I'd ride with this, even, recency bias probably sprinkled in there a little bit, Max.
I think there's a chance you're right for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if we look back on this season. Again, they could win the title this year, in my opinion. So we could easily be looking back on this team as the best one. I think for now, I'm going to say the 07 Suns, the suspension Suns.
Yeah.
Were probably the best team. But I'm ready to believe in this team. I think this team's better than 2010. I think it's better than all the other teams in the Nash era.
I mean, can we just talk about how ridiculous it is that we're even, we literally named our podcast after those teams because they were our favorite Phoenix Suns teams, and here I am throwing them out the car window and taking the newbies instead. But
David, Devin Booker just had a better game than any one of them ever had in any of their games.
There you go. That's all I need to hear to make myself feel better. Thank you, Max.
It helps. I mean, Devin Booker, he's showing something, man. All right, David, it's that time. I think it'll be easier for us to make a prediction for this series for some reason than it was last time.
Yeah, I've written a note here. I want to kind of address something. I'll say this. The last pod I said Lakers in 7, but between then and the series starting, I rewatched the Warriors-Lakers play-in game twice, which meant I'd seen it 3 times by the time the Suns series started. And after that, I tweeted that Suns in 5 wasn't totally out of the question. Why? LeBron and AD just looked bad in that play-in game, and it pretty much played its way out in the series. And if Chris Paul didn't get hurt, I don't think Suns in 5 was totally out of the question. So right now, my prediction is Suns in 6. I think Jokic, I should say, sorry for my translation pronunciation there, but I think he will win 2 games off his own back because he's just that good. But I reserve the right to update that if I spend the next couple of games delving a little bit more into the Blazers Nuggets tape and feeling like we look even better. To be clear, I don't think I'm going backwards and saying Suns in 7 or even Nuggets, but I think it could even be a shorter series than what I'm predicting right now once I delve into some more tape, Max.
I enjoyed you translating Jokic into Australian for us, David. Thank you for that. So I came into this podcast thinking I was going to say Nuggets in 6 because Suns in 6.
Wow. Don't get yourself cancelled, Max.
No, sorry, Suns in 6 because I was going to say that I think that the Nuggets will win at least 2 games because Jokic will get them that.
Yep.
I have that much respect for the MVP. I was going to say that. But honestly, you talked me into Suns in 5 in this podcast.
Love it.
When you brought up the MPJ defense with Mikal, and I just the more we talk through this, like when you talk about something with somebody who's smart, you can talk through things. It helps you think about it, and I think that just you've really made me think that I just don't think this team can guard us. I think we'll look back on this series and be like, why did we thought this was gonna be close? Like, look at these teams. These rosters they're not the same. I know Jokic's gonna be the MVP, but like, man, Chris Paul and Devin Booker are damn freaking good, man. So, like, it's not like we don't have stars on our side. And the way Booker played in the first series, like, he played like an MVP. So how do I know that that's not going to be the same thing from them?
I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast because the amount of comments that I've had this week about my breakdowns on Twitter being enjoyed by people to learn more about the game. I think the reason you and I started this podcast was to learn more off each other, and it's why we've always enjoyed talking Suns. I reckon everyone who has come this far is probably an old 7 Seconds Less listener, knowing that they enjoy the hell out of these conversations and learn a lot from them. And we've learnt from everyone who's interacted with us as well. So the last note I had was to just thank everyone that's still listening 2 hours into a podcast that we do a lot rarer these days, but we still have people commenting to us on Twitter wanting more. And it makes me feel really good, particularly riding on the high of that first playoff win, Max. So I'm very happy to end the podcast there on that note because I think it's a great way to end it.
Yeah, and if you listen to this whole podcast right now, and if you listen to our whole podcast the whole time we've been doing it, back when we were doing this when the Suns sucked, they were terrible, and we still did this every week. If you listen to all those episodes, and if you spent the whole time with us arguing about Dragon Bender versus Marquise Chris on Twitter, and going through all that crap, and the Earl Watson thing, and all the crap, you deserve this. Just enjoy this, man. Even if we lose this series or whatever, we already got something great that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. Is what just happened in that Suns Lakers series, taking down LeBron like that. That was awesome. Just enjoy it, man. That's all I got to say about that.
Thanks, Max, and thanks to everyone listening.
Go Suns.